Sri Shivabalayogi Maharaj Life and Spiritual Ministration by Lieutenant General Hanut Singh. Author's Preface. The genesis of this book lies in my own doubts and misgivings about the spiritual path. In order to resolve these doubts, I submitted a number of questions to my Gurudev, Sri Shivabalayogi Maharaj, and noted down his answers to these questions. Though these questions and answers have been compiled for my own use and reference, it occurred to me that other devotees may have similar doubts, and hence it might prove useful to print these in pamphlet form for dissemination to a wider public. At the same time, I felt that if a short biographical sketch of Sri Swamiji could also be added to these teachings, it would make the proposed pamphlet more attractive and readable. I submitted this proposal to Sri Swamiji, who gave his blessings to the project and also very kindly agreed to answer further questions pertaining to his life and more specifically to the period of his tapas. Thus began the second session of questions and answers. As the material pertaining to Sri Swamiji's life and teachings steadily grew in volume, I soon realized that a single pamphlet would not do adequate justice to this subject, and hence grew the idea of compiling all of this in a full-length booklet. Once again, I mooted this proposal to Sri Swamiji. He bestowed his blessings, and by his grace, what had been originally conceived as a pamphlet is now seeing the light of day as a small book setting out his life and teachings. I have no pretensions to being a writer, nor this book is a biography in the sense that this term implies. No doubt, at the appropriate time, a qualified writer will come forward to write a fully researched, authentic and eminently readable biography of Sri Swamiji. However, till that happens, it is hoped that this book would serve to fill in the gap. The life of a saint is a life essentially in the spirit. Very little of it is discernible because very little of it flows on the surface. And this life of the spirit cannot be generally known because Mahatmas rarely, if ever, talk about it. Only stray glimpses can be caught from the casual utterances of these divine personages. Sri Swamiji, on the other hand, has been much more forthcoming than most other Mahatmas in giving an account of his personal experience during the 12 long years of his tapas period. Therefore, the chief value of this book lies in the fact that it contains an authentic and reasonably detailed account of the tapas of a great Mahatma. That apart, it contains some valuable practical guidance for Dhyana Yoga Sadhana as taught by Sri Swamiji. For both these reasons, this book should prove interesting and useful reading for all classes of spiritual aspirants, and more particularly to the devotees of Sri Swamiji. In writing this book, I have freely used Hindi and Sanskrit words in the text. This is because Sanskrit religious terminology does not easily lend itself to translation and rarely has equivalent English words. These Hindi and Sanskrit words have been explained in the text, and a glossary has also been added at the end of the book for easy reference by the reader. Since the intention is to help the reader in his understanding of the book, the meaning given is not necessarily an exact dictionary definition, but rather an idea of the sense or implied meaning of the word in the context in which it has been used. Spiritual Ministration, Chapter 1, The Early Years. Draksharam is a small village in the East Godavari district of Andhra Pradesh. Though little more than a hamlet today, it has an interesting history. According to local legend, Draksharam was known in the past as Dakshavati and was reputed to be the place where Raja Daksha held his great yajna, or sacrifice, according to Vedic rites. It was during this yajna that his daughter Dakshayani, or Sati, the consort of Lord Shiva, immolated herself when her father slighted Mahadev, her husband. Local tradition also maintains that the great sage Vyasa performed tapas and attained Siddhi at Draksharam. The presiding deity of Draksharam is Bhimeshwar Mahadev, manifested in the form of a Swayambhu Lingam, or self-evolved emblem of Shiva. This is known as the Bhimeshwar Lingam. This lingam is located amidst peaceful surroundings in a shady grove comprising of a banyan tree and some margosa trees. It is this Bhimeshwar Lingam which inspired the great devotional outpourings of the renowned Telugu poet Srinath. A little more than a kilometer away from Daksharam, nestling among groves of palmyra and coconut palms, is the quiet little hamlet of Adivarapupeta. A small canal known locally as the Godavari Canal flows along the outskirts of this hamlet. In order to reach Adivarapupeta, one has to travel on the Madras-Howrah railway line up to Raja Mahindram or Raja Mundri. From here, one has to travel by bus to Draksharam, a distance of approximately 45 kilometers. From Draksharam, one can hire a taxi or a rickshaw or simply walk down. From the direction of Howrah, one has to detrain at Samalkot railway station and from here take a bus to Draksharam via Kakinada. The distance from Samalkot to Draksharam is also about 45 kilometers. Parentage. The inhabitants of Adivarapupeta belong predominantly to the Devanga community, whose principal vocation is the weaving of cloth, primarily dhotis and saris, and then marketing this produce to the nearby towns and villages. Some 3 decades ago, there lived at Adivarapupeta a man named Allaka Bhimanna, who, like the majority of his fellow villagers, belonged to the Devanga community. His wife was Shravannamma, who belonged to the village of Bandarulanka, which is located at a distance of approximately 20 kilometers from Adivarapupeta. As the couple did not have any children, Bhimanna, with the consent of Shravannamma, decided to marry again. His second wife was Parvatamma, the daughter of Goli Satyam, who belonged to his own village of Adivarapupeta. Birth. In due course, Parvatamma bore for her husband 2 daughters and 2 sons. The youngest of these 4 children, a boy who was born on the 24th of January 1935, was named Satyaraju by his parents. This boy later became renowned as Sri 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 Shivabalayogi Maharaj. When Satyaraju was 2 years old, Shravannamma, the first wife, who was still childless, got the approval of her husband and of Parvatamma to be allowed to rear Satyaraju as her own son. Passing away of Bhimanna. Bhimanna often used to tell Parvatamma that their younger son Satyaraju was destined to make a great name for himself and that he would bring great honor to the family, but that he, Bhimanna, would not live to see it. And so it came to pass in the month of July 1937, when Satyaraju was barely 2.5 years old. His father Bhimanna passed away. The 2 widowed wives separated and returned to their respective parental homes. Shravannamma left for her native village, Bandarulanka, and Parvatamma went to live with her father, Goli Satyam. As Satyaraju was too young to be separated from his mother, Shravannamma left him with Parvatamma for the time being. Later, when Satyaraju was 5 years old, Shravannamma came to fetch him and took him away with her to Bandarulanka to bring him up as her own son, as had been agreed to earlier. 6 months later, Parvatamma came on a visit to Bandarulanka, and as Satyaraju wished to return to Adivarapupeta with his mother, the boy returned to Adivarapupeta with the consent of Shravannamma. Childhood days at Adivarapupeta. As mentioned earlier, Shravannamma was now living with her father Goli Satyam. Goli Satyam was a poor man, and the added burden of having to support his widowed daughter and her children, he found it hard to maintain his family. Therefore, though Satyaraju was enrolled in the local village school on his return to Adivarapupeta, he had to do his share of work at home also. The daily pattern of his childhood during this period alternated between work and play. His day began at 5 a.m. After a bath and a light breakfast of curds and rice, he worked at the looms up to 10 a.m., dexterously weaving cloth in vivid hues, which was a specialty of their family. After a hurried lunch, he would attend school between 11 a.m. and 4 p.m. When the school was over, the boys went out to play until they were called home to dinner, which was around 6 p.m. At the evening meal, Satyaraju would sit with his maternal grandfather, Goli Satyam, for an hour or more and tell him what happened during the day. Goli Satyam listened to the boy's account with interest and also availed of this opportunity to impart valuable advice and instruction to his grandson. Thereafter, around 7 p.m., Satyaraju would join one of the many kirtan parties if they happened to be holding a kirtan, or he would go out and again play with his friends. At this time of the day, the boys would often learn and practice the use of the sword and the lati, and Satyaraju proved to be one of the most avid and proficient pupils in this ancient art. Finally, around 10 p.m., the boys used to go to bed. It was indeed a hard life, particularly for a young child who was barely 6 years old, but it was no different from the life followed by the children of the poor in most of India's innumerable villages. It was the penalty they had to pay for their poverty. While poverty has been endemic in India for centuries, it has failed to corrupt or degrade the poor of our country. In fact, in rural India, where the poorest of the poor of India live, we often find qualities of character which are conspicuously absent in the more prosperous cities. Thus, though Goli Satyam was poor, he was a spirited old man with a deep sense of honor and self-respect. He would repeatedly counsel the members of his family, and particularly the children, that poverty, though unfortunate, is not a sin, and hence nothing to be ashamed of. One should never beg or be dependent on others, nor be under any obligation to anybody else. One should live honorably and by honest means, even though such a way of life may be more difficult to follow, and though insincerity and falsehood must be shunned at all costs. Satyaraju loved and respected his grandfather, and as we have already related, he would spend some time every evening in the company of the old man, listening with rapt attention to his worldly wise advice and exhortations. During these sessions, the impressionable young mind of Satyaraju would soak up the wise counsels of his grandfather, and thus Goli Satyam came to exercise a beneficial and lasting influence on the views and character of his favorite grandchild. Grandfather's influence. Satyaraju adored his grandfather, and Goli Satyam in turn deeply loved Satyaraju and predicted a bright future for him. As time went by, Satyaraju came to treat his grandfather as his most trusted confidant. He would scrupulously abide by the counsels given to him by this old man, and would unhesitatingly carry out his directions. An interesting example of this can be seen in the following story. Satyaraju was sent one day to Ramachandrapuram for some work. When he was leaving, his grandfather told him that though they had many relatives in Ramachandrapuram, they were all likely to show scant courtesy and regard. He should therefore conduct himself with dignity in their presence, and should not visit their homes unless invited to do so. Now it so happened that it was nearly 11 o'clock at night by the time Satyaraju was able to finish his work. In the normal course, he could have gone to the house of any one of his relatives for the night, where he would have been assured of a good meal and comfortable bed. However, Remembering his grandfather's counsel, the boy, who was barely 8 years old at the time, chose to spend the night in the verandas or portico of a closed shop, regardless of the inconvenience and discomfort this entailed, and came back early the next morning. When he related this to his grandfather on his return, Goli Satyam was very happy at the nerve and resolve shown by Satyaraju, and he was reassured more than ever before that his grandson had a bright future ahead of him. Satyaraju goes to live with his stepmother. In January 1943, when Satyaraju was in his 8th year, his stepmother Shravanamma came on a visit to Adivarapupeta, and with the concurrence of Parvatamma and Goli Satyam, she took Satyaraju with her. At his new home in Bandarulanka, Satyaraju was admitted to the local village school, and he soon established himself as the leader among the boys of his group. Satyaraju was keen on his studies and proved to be a bright student. However, a promising academic career was cut short when his stepmother abruptly decided to withdraw him from school. Satyaraju resented this as he was eager to continue his studies, but his stepmother refused to oblige on the plea that she needed his help at home, and as she was unable to manage her affairs on her own. Satyaraju soon realized what this help to his stepmother meant. He would be awoken early in the morning and set to work to weave cloth. The work quota assigned to him by his stepmother was to weave half a sari every day. It must be remembered that Satyaraju was barely 8 years old, and working long hours in the primitive and heavy loom imposed a heavy physical strain on his body. As soon as he finished his quota of weaving, Shravanamma would send the boy to the market to buy cotton or to sell the finished produce of cloth. When he returned from these assignments, he was set to work on household chores. Thus Satyaraju had to slave for his stepmother all day long, nor would she allow him to go out and play with the other boys as he did in his native village of Adivarapupeta. That apart, Satyaraju was in the habit of eating 5 to 6 times a day, and Parvatamma made sure that her children got nourishing and wholesome food. Shravanamma, on the other hand, though comparatively much better off, was very niggardly in the matter of food. Satyaraju had to be content with a light breakfast and 2 main meals a day, and these 2 were far from substantial. As a result, Satyaraju often remained hungry. The hard work, coupled with inadequate nourishment, led to a marked deterioration in the physical condition of the boy. Notwithstanding all these troubles, Satyaraju continued to work devotedly for his stepmother. However, he was not at all happy and often yearned to return to his mother and grandfather at Adivarapupeta. Now it so happened that Shravanamma, unknown to Satyaraju, had been secretly carrying on an illicit trade in opium. One day the officials of the excise department were tipped off that Shravanamma was in illegal possession of 40 tolas of opium, and that she was keeping this hidden in her house. So a search warrant was taken out and a party came to search her residence. In the meanwhile, Satyaraju got wind of this through some of his friends and rushed home to inform his stepmother about it, and asked her point blank whether it was a fact that she had this opium hidden in her house. Thoroughly frightened by now, Shravanamma admitted her nefarious activities and showed Satyaraju where she had hidden the opium. Satyaraju quickly removed it from the house, and so when the search party came, they could find nothing. Though he saved his stepmother from arrest and humiliation, Satyaraju was mortified to learn from what his stepmother had herself told him that she was in fact indulging in dishonest trade practices. He severely castigated her for this and threatened to leave her and return to Adivarapupeta if she did not give up these activities. She appeared to relent and promised to give them up, but this was only a passing phase. Satyaraju soon discovered that his stepmother had gone back to her old ways and was continuing her illicit trade in opium. Seeing that she was incorrigible, Satyaraju refused to stay with her any longer, and Shravanamma too had begun to be irked by Satyaraju's constant criticism of her illicit trade practices. And so when the boy sought her permission to return to Adivarapopeta, she readily consented. Return to Adivarapopeta. Satyaraju had barely stayed 5 months with his stepmother. Though this had been in many ways a trying period, it was not entirely wasted. Shravanamma had good business acumen, and with his keen intelligence and observant nature, Satyaraju managed to gain useful experience in the conduct of business, particularly in buying and marketing of produce. As a result of this experience, he became convinced that it was only by taking to business that he and his family could hope to break the shackles of poverty which had bound them for generations. Therefore, though he had been fond of studies and an eager student earlier, he did not rejoin school when he returned to Adivarapopeta. Instead, he decided to devote all his time and energies to helping his family earn a decent livelihood. He would put in long hours of work at the family looms, and though Goli Satyam kept a watchful eye to make sure that his young grandson did not overstrain himself, Satyaraju nevertheless managed to put in extra hours of work in the quiet. He would take the finished produce and sell it in villages and markets further afield, where he managed to get a better price. He would then hand over the proceeds from his labor to his mother and grandfather. During the summer months, he would attempt to earn extra money by selling sherbet and aerated cool drinks. Thus, the compulsions of poverty forced Satyaraju to work hard to earn a living, when other more fortunate boys of his age normally went to school or indulged in carefree play. But this is not to say that it was a case of all work and no play. Satyaraju was an active and intelligent boy who had been good at studies and fond of games. Though he had to perforce give up studies after his 8th year, he continued to participate in games and play along with the other boys of his age and excelled them in all feats, demanding skill and athletic prowess. From the early age of 6, he learned and practiced the use of the sword and the lati for defensive and offensive purposes. He had also acquired a reputation among his playmates and with the elders of his village for his fearlessness and bold outspokenness, and his deeply ingrained sense of fair play and justice. All these qualities combined to make him a natural leader of the boys of his village. At the same time, he was feared and resented by those who were hypocritical or deceitful in their ways, because they often became the targets of his ridicule and public exposure. There is an interesting story of this period which aptly illustrates Satyaraju's uncompromising devotion to truth and also his fearlessness. Satyaraju's uncle, who was a powerful and respected man of the village and the head of their family and community, had become attached to a sadhu whom he later accepted as his guru. Now this sadhu was a boastful and pompous fellow who threatened dire consequences to anyone who crossed his path. One of his constantly repeated threats was that by his curse he could transform any erring mortal who wittingly or unwittingly incurred his wrath into one or other of some low animal species. The simple village folk readily believed this, and hence they went about in awe and fear of this angry old man. Naturally, Satyaraju took an instant dislike to this sadhu for his pompous and bellicose manner and his angry threats. He was convinced in his own mind that the sadhu did not possess any such powers he boasted of, and so he secretly resolved to expose him. One day, when everybody was seated in the presence of the sadhu, and he was holding forth in his usual boastful manner, Satyaraju asked the sadhu what the sadhu would do if someone were to pinch any of his things. "I would turn him into a tiger," said the sadhu promptly. Thereupon Satyaraju pretended to express awe and wonder, but remained quiet. A short while later, the sadhu happened to go out, and finding himself alone in the sadhu's room, Satyaraju quickly took his bows and arrows and hid them on a ledge just above the place where the sadhu normally slept. He then sneaked out unnoticed from the room. When the sadhu returned and found his bow and arrows missing, inquiries were made and a search conducted, but they could not be traced. Now the sadhu lost his temper and began ranting and raving about what he would do to the culprit. Satyaraju was an interested spectator of the whole scene, suggested in a seemingly innocent tone that the sadhu, by his powers, should be able to locate both his missing bow and arrows and also the culprit. This only enraged the sadhu further, and Satyaraju was quickly hustled away by anxious relatives lest the sadhu pronounce a curse on him. Awed by the sadhu's terrible anger and somewhat anxious by now as to what might happen to him, Satyaraju ran straight to his grandfather and told him in all innocence, "I have hidden his bows and arrows. If the sadhu turns me into a tiger, then the people will hunt me down and kill me, so lie me up inside." Goli Satyam could not help being amused. He told the boy not to worry and to wait and see what happens. Thus, reassured by his grandfather, and seeing that nothing had happened to him, even though some considerable time had elapsed, Satyaraju became firm in his original conviction that this sadhu was a hoax. After some time he presented himself before the sadhu and, with not a little trepidation, told them, in the presence of the usual gathering of his admirers, that he had hidden the sadhu's bows and arrows, and showed him the hiding place. And to the astonishment and horror of his relatives, he now challenged the sadhu to transform him into a tiger, as he had been threatening to do so all along. The sadhu fretted and cursed, but Satyaraju boldly stood his ground, and nothing happened to him. Satyaraju was soundly belaboured by his uncle and others for his undecorous behaviour, but he had proved his point. The sadhu never again made such boasts, nor did he ever succeed in terrorizing the villagers again. With his stepmother again. Sometime in the year 1947, when Satyaraju was in his 12th year, his stepmother fell seriously ill. As she was bedridden and needed to be looked after, she sent for Satyaraju. Accordingly, Satyaraju left for Bandarulanka and nursed his stepmother on her sick bed. She soon recovered, but in spite of promises to the contrary, she once again started indulging in illicit opium trade. Though she tried to conceal this from her stepson, it did not take Satyaraju long to discover her clandestine activities, and as before he expressed his strong disapproval. This led to friction and tension between mother and son, which was aggravated by other incidents of a similar nature. The matter came to a head one night when Shravanamma was serving food to Satyaraju and spoke to him harshly about a particular incident, severely criticizing him for his conduct. Satyaraju was cut to the quick by his stepmother's unjustified abuse. He immediately got up, leaving his meal unfinished, and announced that he was leaving for Adivarapupeta that very instant. At the same time, he vowed that he would never again set foot in his stepmother's house. He collected his belongings and came out, but as it was raining heavily, he decided to wait until the morning. However, as he had vowed never to return to his stepmother's house, he resolved to spend the night in the veranda only. Shravanamma by now had relented and come out to ask Satyaraju to forgive her, and requested him to come in and sleep comfortably in the room. However, Satyaraju refused to be persuaded, and in reply to his stepmother's importunities, he simply reiterated his resolve to never set foot in his stepmother's house. Satyaraju leaves his stepmother's house for good. Early next morning, Satyaraju set off on foot for Adivarapupeta. As he neared the Godavari river, he suddenly realized that he had no money to pay for the boat fare. There was no question of turning back at this stage, and so he racked his brain for a solution to this problem. On an impulse, he took off his shirt and decided to offer it to the boatman as payment for the boat fare. Just then, as luck would have it, he found a 1 anna bit lying on the road. This was the exact amount required for the boat fare, and relieved now of his anxiety in this regard, Satyaraju proceeded happily on his journey. Satyaraju was well aware that apart perhaps from his mother and grandfather, his other relatives would not approve of his having left his stepmother to return home again. So instead of proceeding directly to Adivarapupeta, Satyaraju first went to Draksharam. He reposed great faith in Bhimeshwar Mahadev, the presiding deity of Draksharam, and was deeply devoted to him. It was natural, therefore, that he should turn to his Ishtadeva in this hour of need. He came and stood before the Bhimeshwar Lingam and silently prayed to the Lord that his relatives would understand the reasons that had compelled him to leave his stepmother's house. Satisfied that the Lord had listened to his prayer, he then proceeded to Adivarapupeta. As he had anticipated, his uncle and other relatives were very annoyed when they learned that he had left his stepmother and come back. He was summarily ordered by them to return to Bandarulanka to live with his stepmother in fulfillment of his father's pledge to her. However, he fortunately found an ally in his grandfather, who, after listening to the entire account, decided that Satyaraju had done well to leave his stepmother and come away. Thus, with the backing and support of his grandfather, Satyaraju was able to counter the pressure being put on him by his other relatives. Shortly after his return, Sravannamma also came to Adivarapupeta and pleaded to Satyaraju to return, but no amount of persuasion or threats could move him to go back on his vow to never set foot in her house again. Gradually, the pressure for his return to Bandarulanka died down, and he was able to live in peace at Adivarapupeta. A business venture, the beedi shop. One of the driving ambitions of Satyaraju's life, even at this young age, was to redeem his family and particularly his mother from the clutches of poverty. He soon realized that the traditional family vocation of weaving would never bring him the riches he dreamt of. In fact, in spite of hours daily slaving at the looms by all members of the family, including even the children, the family was barely able to earn enough money to ensure a subsistence-level existence. Satyaraju had pondered often on this problem, and as mentioned earlier, he had realized at a very early age that business was one vocation that promised quick and adequate returns. With this at the back of his mind, he was constantly on the lookout for an opening to launch a business venture. When he returned this time from Bandarulanka, he learned that one of the boys in the village had opened a beedi shop on a capital outlay of just 25 rupees, and his business was visibly prospering. This gave Satyaraju the idea of himself opening a similar beedi shop, and as was his practice, he discussed this proposal with his grandfather. Goli Satyam, however, was not pleased with this idea because he felt that running a beedi shop was not a dignified vocation for a member of his family. He told Satyaraju that if he wanted to do business, he should plan to become a cloth merchant, which would be a more befitting profession for a member of the Devanga community. In fact, he told him that this was what he had all along planned and hoped for whenever he thought about his grandson's future career. Satyaraju greatly respected his grandfather's views and opinions, and this unexpected opposition from him proved to be a damper on his immediate plans. However, notwithstanding his grandfather's disapproval, Satyaraju did not entirely give up the idea of starting a beedi shop, and he would often be preoccupied with thinking about it and planning this pet project of his. One day, absorbed in such thoughts, he was walking along when he espied a copper coin lying on the wayside. Now, finding a copper coin in this manner is considered to be a sign of impending good fortune, and taking this to be a propitious portent, he picked up the coin and pressed it reverently to his eyes and proceeded to join his playmates for a game of marbles. Whether it was the influence of the copper coin or just by his luck, Satyaraju proved unbeatable that day. By the time they finished play, Satyaraju had won marbles worth 5 rupees. He sold marbles forth at amount, and pocketing the money, he went straight to the shrine of Bhimeshwar Mahadev at Draksharam. Bowing before his Ishtadeva with devotion, he fervently prayed to the Lord to grant him success in his proposed venture to start a beedi shop. He then returned and with his initial capital of 5 rupees started his beedi business. His business prospered from the very start, and he was soon making more money than he ever had through weaving. What is more, the rival beedi shop for some reason was forced to close down, and all the customers were transferred to Satyaraju's shop. He started making good profits, and he regularly deposited the proceeds from his shop with his mother and grandfather, which pleased them immensely. The objections and reservations that Goli Satyam had earlier voiced to setting up a beedi shop were soon forgotten. Satyaraju, of course, was highly pleased with the success of his venture, and he began to make plans to further expand his business. And so time passed happily for the boy, and Satyaraju soon entered his 14th year. Spiritual Ministration Chapter 2, Initiation into Tapomarg. The life of Satyaraju so far is the ordinary story of an ordinary village boy. Though Satyaraju undoubtedly possessed certain exceptional qualities of character, there was nothing discernible in his mental makeup or in the course of his life taken so far, which would mark him out as one destined for a life of spiritual striving and extraordinary spiritual attainments. On the contrary, his ambitions and endeavors until now were solely centered around redeeming his family from poverty and on ensuring for them a prosperous future. But fate had decreed otherwise. As subsequent events will show, Satyaraju had come to this world for an altogether different purpose. He was destined to follow the path trod by the ancient seers of Bharatvarsh, for he belonged to that elite company of Mahatmas, Rishis and Maharishis, who have in unbroken succession blessed the sacred soul of our country from the very beginning of time. Those who are interested in astrology and allied sciences would in all likelihood be aware of a remarkable collection of writings on this subject known as the Bhrigu Nadi and the Kumar Nadi. The Bhrigu Nadi is reputed to have been written by sage Bhrigu and is in Sanskrit. The Kumar Nadi similarly is reputed to have been written by Kumar Swami and is in classical Tamil. Both these works deal with astrological predictions based on individual horoscopes, and if the relevant horoscope can be traced, an unbelievably accurate and detailed account can be found in it of the past births, present life and future births of the person concerned. In this context, it is mentioned as a matter of interest that many years later, when the Bhrigu Nadi and the Kumar Nadi pertaining to Satyaraju's horoscope were taken out and read, the Pandits reading them out, as also those listening to them, were alike awed and wonderstruck by the divine personality of him that the horoscope revealed. It is also interesting to note that both the Bhrigu Nadi and the Kumar Nadi corroborated each other. Speaking of the past, the Nadis revealed that Satyaraju had taken 27 earlier births which read like a spiritual who's who. Those former births were Sanaka, one of the 4 sons of Brahma, Sukha Mahamuni, the son of Vyas, who propagated the Srimad Bhagavatam to Parikshit, Shivadev, Jnaneshwar, Jayanti, Tulsidas, renowned as the author of the Ramcharitmanas, Kabir, the well-known poet saint, Rajabhushan, Namdev, Mahadev, Jayachandra, Mahabala, Nityananda, Bhavananda, Sri Chandra, the eldest son of Guru Nanak, who founded the Udasi sect of Sannyasis. This birth is also referred to by Tapasviji Maharaj, who will be later mentioned in this book. Lahiri Pati, Lahiri Maharaj, the Param Guru of Swami Yogananda. Parameshwar Prasad, Ram Shastri, Guru Arjun Dev, Shivaji, the great king and hero of Maharashtra, Gadadhar, Sri Ramakrishna Paramahansa, Panni Mohan Bhattacharya, and finally the present birth as Satyaraju. Writing about the present birth, both the Nadis accurately describe the initiation into Tapomarg and devote an entire chapter entitled Balayogi Bhava Charitra, which gives a detailed account of the tapasya that Satyaraju would undertake. After completion of this tapasya, the Nadis predict a life devoted to spiritual ministration and spiritual upliftment of all mankind, both in India and abroad. The initiation, Sunday, 7th August 1949. The foregoing account of the Nadis and their predictions has been included as a matter of interest only. The authenticity one attaches to these is a matter of one's personal belief. In any case, at the time we write about all these events lay in the future. On Sunday, 7th August 1949, Shravan Shukla Chaturdasi of Virodhi Samvatsara, Satyaraju was exactly 14 years, 6 months and 14 days old. Nothing had happened in his life so far to presage the extraordinary events of this momentous day, as consequence of which an ordinary village boy was transformed into a Balayogi and was to eventually emerge after a period of 12 years of tapasya as a Siddha Purush and Jivan Mukta, known to the world as Sri 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 Shivabalayogi Maharaj, and to his disciples and followers as Sri Swamiji. It is best to recount the happenings of this day in Swamiji's own words. On the day preceding the great event, that is Saturday, 6th August 1949, there was no inkling in my mind of what was in store for me the next day. I was preoccupied with the thought that I had to go to Kakinada and bring back my mother and Nanaji, maternal grandfather, as I would require money for this trip. I spent most of the day collecting dues from the people who owed me money for purchases made from my shop. On Sunday, the 7th of August 1949, I had a light breakfast of rice and curds and went out to play with my friends. We played marbles from 6 a.m. to 2 p.m. I appeared to have a winning streak that day and won all the games. Around 2 p.m. I began to feel hungry, so I decided to go home. I retained the cash I had won but distributed the winnings of marbles among my friends. I then bought some vegetables and took them home to my sister to be cooked for my lunch. While I was waiting for my lunch to be ready, my friend Gangaraju came to my place and suggested that I accompany him for a bath in the Godavari Canal, which flowed on the outskirts of the village. I replied that I was feeling rather hungry and weak, and hence did not feel inclined to go. However, Gangaraju persisted, and as my sister said that lunch would not be ready for another half hour at least, I agreed to accompany Gangaraju. When we reached the canal, we found the game of marbles was still going on, and we joined in. I again won. It was now nearing 3 p.m. and I was feeling very hungry. I purchased and ate 2 vadas and drank a cup of coffee from a nearby hotel with the money I had just won. We then started off at the canal for our bath. On the way, there was a grove of palmyra trees, and as we were passing this grove, 3 palmyra fruit fell down of their own accord. The boys who were with me ran to pick them up, and as I was the acknowledged leader of our group, they brought the fruit over to me. A palmyra fruit can be broken into 4 equal pieces, and as there were 12 of us, including myself and Gangaraju, I distributed 12 pieces equally, taking 1 for myself. After the snack of vadas and coffee at the hotel, I had lit a cheroot and was smoking it. With the cheroot stuck in my mouth, I peeled the palmyra fruit and started squeezing it to extract the juice. Just then, for no accountable reason, my body began trembling all over. I was wondering what had happened to me when all of a sudden I saw a jyoti or light emerging from the fruit in my hand. Almost simultaneously, the Omkar Dwani or sound of Om also started coming from the fruit. Mesmerized, I continued to stare at the palmyra fruit. The divine light and sound emerging from the fruit engulfed me in blissful waves, as a result of which the trembling of my body ceased and my mind became calm and peaceful. As I continued to observe this strange phenomenon, the fruit I had been holding disappeared, and I saw instead a Shivalinga in my hand. This Shivalinga was black in color and approximately a foot or a foot and a half in height. The Omkar Shabd continued to resound all the while, and the Shivalinga continued to emit the same dazzling light. I was watching the Shivalinga intensely when all at once it broke into two half pieces and fell apart. It was at this time, I think, that the palmyra fruit also fell from my hand, and a man in the attire of a Jangam Devar stood before me. This man was well over 7 feet tall, with a strong, well-knit and beautifully proportioned body. He had a dark complexion and was extremely handsome and attractive, with large and beautiful eyes. His long jata or matted hair worn by yogis was piled up on his head in the manner of the rishis of yore. He had a necklace of rudraksha beads and a small Shivalinga suspended from this necklace, resting on his broad chest. He wore a white dhoti, again in the manner of the old rishis. A bright effulgence emanated from his being which blotted out all other vision. I could only see this yogi surrounded by a bright radiance and nothing else. The yogi spoke to me in Telugu and asked me to sit down. I asked, "Why do you want me to sit down?" But the yogi again repeated his command to sit. So I sat down. He then told me to sit in the Padmasana, the lotus posture. I replied that I did not know how to sit in the Padmasana. Thereupon the yogi placed my feet in the correct position and made me sit in the Padmasana. He then told me to close my eyes. I once again protested, "Why do you want me to close my eyes?" He replied, "Close your eyes and then I will tell you." So I closed my eyes. He then touched me at the Brakuti, the spot between the eyebrows, with his middle finger and gently tapped me on the head. Immediately I lost outer consciousness and went into deep samadhi. I became totally unaware of my body and my surroundings. All I could see was the same black Shivalinga that had appeared earlier in my hand, surrounded by dazzling light. And all I could hear was the Omkar Dwani. My mind was completely absorbed in this vision and sound, to the exclusion of everything else. While this spiritual drama was being enacted, it is interesting to note that the other boys, the playmates of Satyaraju, heard or saw nothing. They were absorbed in eating their share of the palmyra fruit or in simply playing around. However, they soon noticed that Satyaraju, instead of joining them in their play, was sitting apart in a yogic posture with eyes closed. Thinking that he was play acting the role of a sadhu, they first began to tease him, and when they got no response, they became more rough. Some tried to pull him out of his Padmasana posture, while others punched and slapped him. Finding him unmoved, they then smeared the juice of the palmyra fruit and mud brought from the canal all over his body. When Satyaraju failed to react to even this, they carried him bodily to the canal and then put him in the water. But Satyaraju was totally unconscious of all this ill treatment being meted out to him by his playmates, and hence there was still no response from him. By now it became apparent to the boys that this was no play acting on Satyaraju's part, but at the same time they could not make out what came over him. His unconscious and seemingly lifeless condition frightened them. Apprehensive that they might be accused of having caused this condition, they washed off the dirt they smeared on his body and carried him out of the canal and seated him on the canal bund. They then ran home and informed his relatives that something strange and inexplicable had happened to Satyaraju. It will be recalled that Satyaraju's mother and maternal grandfather had both gone to Kakinada. So when the news about Satyaraju's strange condition reached his home, his uncle, accompanied by 4 or 5 other persons, went to the spot where Satyaraju was sitting in samadhi. Bewildered and not knowing what to do, they simply stood around watching him. One among them, a person named Gora Mallanna, ventured to suggest that Satyaraju had been possessed by a ghost or a spirit. In order to exorcise this supposed spirit, he began belaboring the boy with a stout wooden club that he was carrying. In the process, he accidentally struck Satyaraju in the same spot between the eyebrows where the boy's divine guru had touched him. As a result of this blow, Satyaraju's deep samadhi broke and he regained just enough consciousness of his surroundings to realize that some people were standing around him, but that was about all. The vision of the Shivalinga, surrounded by dazzling light, continued as before, and this obstructed his normal vision. He vaguely recognized his uncle among the group around him, and he asked him for a dhoti to put on in place of the shorts he was wearing. His uncle gave him a piece of cloth that he was carrying, and when Satyaraju got up to put on the cloth, two among the group caught hold of him by the arms, one on either side, and more or less carried him home. All this while those who had come to see Satyaraju were pestering him with all sorts of questions in order to decipher the strange condition which they found him. Some asked him if he had been possessed by a ghost or spirit, and others asked whether the village deity had possessed him. Some others wanted to know whether he had become a sadhu, but Satyaraju made no reply. He was dimly aware of what was going on around him, and his mind, in any case, was totally absorbed in the divine vision of the Shivalinga that remained continuously in front of his eyes. When the party reached Satyaraju's house, the boy found that his legs had become stiff like wood, and he could not negotiate the veranda steps. So he was carried up onto the veranda, but as they tried to take him inside the house, his legs got stuck on the door. Still, and try as they might, the people who were with him could neither bend his legs nor take him through the door. After futile attempts towards this end for over an hour, they finally gave up and decided to make him sit down in the outer veranda of the house. Even this they accomplished with great difficulty. In the meantime, word of what had happened had spread in the village, and people in large numbers thronged to see Satyaraju. They kept pestering him with the same sort of questions as had been put to him earlier, and when their questions elicited no response from Satyaraju, they began to conjecture among themselves. Some said he was possessed by some occult spirit, and others diagnosed it as hysteria, and some contemptuously dismissed it as bluff and play acting. Only one among the assembled crowd appeared to have an inkling of Satyaraju's true state. He was an old man of 60 years, a Harijan by the name Peddaka Maraju, who made bold to suggest that Satyaraju was under some divine influence and had been transformed into a yogi. Though Satyaraju missed his midday meal as a consequence of these unforeseen events, and though he had been very hungry when he started off to have a bath in the canal, Satyaraju's appetite had vanished, and he felt no inclination to eat and declined to take any food. Notwithstanding his refusal, his relatives forced him to take some milk. Then, as time passed, the initial excitement soon wore off, and by about 8 p.m. that evening, people had begun to return to their homes, though some, more curious than the others, stayed on to see what would happen next. These people kept sitting around Satyaraju talking amongst themselves, and as the night advanced, dropped off to sleep one by one. Around 11 p.m. that night, Satyaraju had at last found himself alone, all the others having gone to sleep. The divine vision of Shiva, surrounded by the bright radiance, was still continuing, and so also was the Omkar Shabd. It now entered Satyaraju's mind to go back to the canal bund where the divine experience had originally been vouchsafed to him. When he got up to go, one of the boys, Govinda, also awoke and tried to follow him, but Satyaraju gave him the slip and made his way back to the same spot where his divine guru had first made him sit down. And when he sat there again, he found that he could now not close his eyes. However, this caused no hindrance to his dhyan, for he continued to see the divine vision with his eyes, and his mind remained fully absorbed in this vision. Soon after he reached the canal bund, it began to rain heavily, and the rain continued throughout the night. But Satyaraju was quite indifferent to all this. Even though he was thoroughly drenched, it did not occur to him to move to some other place where he could get shelter from the rain. The second day, Monday, the 8th of August 1949. Next morning, on Monday, the 8th of August 1949, a Harijan boy named Pantapatti Veeraraju brought and offered some raw milk, which Satyaraju accepted and consumed. Soon after, the villagers, who were curious to know what had happened to Satyaraju, came to his house, and when they did not find him at home, they came to the canal bund to see him.
Finding that the boy was being drenched by the rain, they carried him to a banyan tree near the village and seated him under the tree. They then placed a palmyra leaf umbrella over him to protect him from the rain. While all this was happening, Satyaraju was aware of the activity around him, but was totally indifferent to what was going on. As his eyes continued to remain open, he could see the people around him, but only as shadowy figures sitting in the background of the bright vision that remained steadily and constantly before his eyes. If some faces came into focus, he would vaguely remember that he had seen them somewhere before, but could neither recall their names, nor did it occur to him that they were his friends or relatives or fellow villagers. For the fact of the matter was that the touch of his divine Guru had obliterated these thoughts from his mind, and at one go had snapped all of his early connections. Though it rained throughout the day, Satyaraju was quite oblivious to it. He continued to sit under the makeshift shelter of the palmyra leaf umbrella, totally absorbed in the vision that he continued to see all the time. At around 9 p.m. that night, some Harijan boys who were passing by heard the Omkar Dhwani emanating from the spot where Satyaraju was sitting. Not knowing what this strange sound was, they ran and informed the people of the village. Some villagers came to investigate, and they too heard the Omkar Dhwani coming from that direction. This continued for nearly 3/4 of an hour, whilst the villagers stood at a distance, listening to it in awed silence. Eventually, when the sound ceased, they made bold to approach Satyaraju, lifted him and carried him to his house. At home, his sister gave him some milk to drink. After he had consumed the milk, the divine fervour that had gripped his mind so far abated somewhat, and as Satyaraju felt drowsy, he went to sleep. Little did he know that this was the last proper sleep that he was going to have for a long time to come, for during the 12 long years of tapas that followed, Satyaraju hardly ever slept at all. He may have dozed off once in a while for a few minutes during breaks in his samadhi, and that too without ever leaving his seat or asana, but he never lay down to sleep again for the rest of the tapas period. Third day, Tuesday, the 9th of August, 1949. After a refreshing night's sleep, Satyaraju got up, and at 6:30 a.m. he partook of a light breakfast of idlis and chutney, which his sister had prepared for him. When he had finished his breakfast, the divine vision of the Shivalinga, surrounded by light, and the sound of the Omkar Dhwani once again gripped his mind, and so he went back to the canal where he had first had the divine experience. On reaching there, he felt severe bodily discomfort, which was followed by vomiting and diarrhea. At that time, one of his playmates, Govinda, who had accompanied him, looked after him and tended to his needs. Soon after, he became absorbed in contemplation of the divine vision. Later that morning, a lady from the village came to where Satyaraju was sitting on the canal bund, and with firm faith that Satyaraju was now a Balayogi or boy yogi, she worshipped him with incense and flowers and made the offering of a coconut. Having finished her worship, she distributed pieces of the coconut as prasad. That same morning, some of the villagers, of their own accord, erected a pandal of palmyra leaves for Satyaraju under the nearby banyan tree. The construction of this pandal was completed by about 3:30 p.m. The same villagers then approached Satyaraju and requested him to sit under the newly erected pandal. Satyaraju agreed to their request and took his seat there. At around 5:30 p.m. that evening, Satyaraju's mother and grandfather returned home from Kakinada. When they were informed of the strange happenings of the past 2 days, they became greatly alarmed and immediately rushed off to the canal bund in order to ascertain the true state of affairs. On reaching there, they observed Satyaraju seated under the palmyra leaf pandal beneath the banyan tree, absorbed in samadhi. Deeply agitated, both Parvatama and Goli Satyam repeatedly called out the boy by his name, but there was no response. Satyaraju was oblivious to the outer world and totally unaware of their presence. Seeing her son in that condition, Parvatama could not control herself and became almost hysterical. weeping loudly and clasping the boy to her bosom, and began asking what had come over him to make him behave in this inexplicable manner. The loud wailing and sobbing of his mother gradually brought Satyaraju back to conscious awareness of his surroundings. Observing that her son was now aware of her presence, Parvatama beseeched him with tears copiously flowing from her eyes all the while to return home to her. Satyaraju's mind was by now totally detached from worldly relationships, and hence he was unmoved by his mother's tears and pleading. He calmly told her that he had embarked on the divine quest and that he could not leave this blessed path and go back home. Having said that, he sat back totally detached, and no amount of weeping or protestations from his mother could make him relent. Finding that the boy was firmly resolved to continue on his chosen path, his grandfather blessed him, saying that the path he had chosen to follow was no doubt excellent, and hence he should adhere to it resolutely. At the same time, he could not help expressing his disappointment. He told Satyaraju that they had looked upon him as the hope of the family and the prop of their old age. Now there was nobody to look after them. In reply to this, Satyaraju assured them that they would not have to face any problems, financial or otherwise, and that everything would be well with the family. After this brief conversation, Satyaraju closed his eyes and again passed into samadhi. The grief-stricken mother, however, could not bear to leave him sitting there and return home alone. Not knowing what to do next, nor knowing how to resolve this strange situation, she too sat down nearby, perplexed and disconsolate. From time to time, she would look at her son and then weep softly into the folds of her sari. On one such occasion, she looked up towards Satyaraju, and there suddenly flashed before her eyes the entrancing vision of the Trimurti, Brahma, Vishnu and Mahesh. Thinking that it was a hallucination, she rubbed her eyes and looked again. The vision was still there in all its dazzling splendor and soul-enthralling beauty. Now, whichever way she looked, she saw only the Trimurti and nothing else. How long this lasted, she was unable to tell, for time itself had come to a standstill. The vision made her realize that her son was under divine protection and that she need not fear for him any longer. This brought peace to her troubled mind, and she returned home happy and contented. Early difficulties. Though Parvatama was thus reassured by the divine vision, her motherly heart continued to remain solicitous about Satyaraju's well-being, and so she endeavoured to feed him and look after him. However, Satyaraju declined to accept her services and went to the extent of dissuading her from visiting him. This grieved Parvatama, but she had no choice except to comply. At this stage, Gora Mallanna, whose house was adjoining the place and where the Balayogi sat, took it upon himself to look after the young yogi. Though well-intentioned, Gora Mallanna was totally unversed in spiritual matters. It may be recalled that he was the same person who had awoken Satyaraju from his initial samadhi by striking him with a club, in the mistaken belief that he was possessed by a spirit. Now this Gora Mallanna remembered having heard somewhere that the great rishis of yore, when doing tapas, used to draw sustenance from vayu or air alone. He therefore advised Satyaraju to do likewise, and Satyaraju agreed to his suggestion. In pursuance of this suggested course of action, Gora Mallanna began to gradually reduce the meager quantity of fruit and milk that Satyaraju was taking. Eventually, he stopped giving him anything altogether, with the result that now Satyaraju was taking no nourishment at all. When Mother Parvatama heard of this, she was greatly agitated, taking some milk with her. Went to where her son was sitting and beseeched him to partake of the milk. Moved by her entreaties, Satyaraju drank the milk she had brought. This greatly annoyed Gora Mallanna, who remonstrated with the Balayogi, but Satyaraju simply answered that he would not refuse anything when it was offered to him with love and devotion. This further annoyed Gora Mallanna, who angrily retorted, "If I bring you meat, will you eat that also?" The Balayogi looked at him calmly and then said in a soft voice, "Yes, if you offer it with bhakti or devotion, I shall eat it." Gora Mallanna, however, was not mollified and stormed off home in a rage, saying that henceforth he would have nothing more to do with the yogi. From that day onwards, he stopped rendering the small services that he was doing for the yogi, but also began to actively deride him. It It is a strange but inevitable fact that when an aspirant sets on the spiritual path, he always finds detractors putting obstacles in his way. This happened in the case of Satyaraju also. Though the people by and large had come to recognize Satyaraju as a Balayogi and were treating him with veneration, there were nevertheless some among them who failed to see the light. Prompted by envy or simply to create mischief, they would subject the young yogi to all sorts of torments when he was immersed in samadhi, particularly when there was no one to check their misdemeanors. When Gora Mallana left in a huff, Mother Parvatama began ministering to the needs of her son. However, she could not remain by his side all of the time, and when she left him to go home, some of the boys who had feared and disliked Satyaraju but had not dared to show open hostility towards him earlier would now creep out and beat him to their heart's content. On one occasion, some particularly venomous individuals soaked a piece of cloth in kerosene, set it alight, and threw it on the Balayogi when he was sitting in samadhi. As Satyaraju was quite oblivious of his body, he neither knew nor felt anything at the time, and so the lighted cloth caused some deep and painful burns in his hands and legs. Disregarding the excruciating pain from these burns, Balayogi continued his tapas as before. When word about this incident spread in the village, one kindly old man prepared an ointment for these burns. He came daily and applied the ointment to the affected parts, even while the yogi sat immersed in samadhi, and then quietly went back. Through the ministration of this good man, the burns gradually healed up, but the scars left by these burns can be seen even to this day. Though most people by now believed that Satyaraju was genuinely engaged in tapas, still there was the usual crop of doubters who scoffed at the whole idea. One such person was a man named Dora Veeraraju, a resident of Adivarapupeta. Dora Veeraraju decided to take it upon himself to expose the Balayogi, and for this purpose he solicited the assistance of a friend of his, one Chinta Suranna, who was an Ayurvedic Pandit hailing from Someshwara near Ramachandrapura. One evening, both these persons came to where the Balayogi was sitting under his pandal of palmyra leaves, ostensibly for his darshan, and then waited there until everybody had left. As soon as they were alone with the Balayogi, Chinta Suranna, in order to test the intensity of the yogi samadhi, pulled out his legs so as to unlock the yogi's Padmasana posture. He succeeded in pulling out the legs, but they remained where he had left them. He then tried to awaken the yogi from samadhi by prying open one of his eyelids with his fingers. His eyelid too remained half opened, but the yogi's samadhi continued undisturbed. Having some knowledge of these things, Suranna was by now convinced that the yogi's samadhi was genuine, and he felt abashed for what he had done. He now tried to close the half-opened eyelid and put the yogi back into the Padmasana posture, but his efforts were to no avail. He struggled at this task through most of the night but could not succeed. Finally, when the yogi emerged from his samadhi, Suranna fell at his feet and begged his pardon for what he had done. The Balayogi smiled and readily forgave him. The next morning, Suranna went to meet Parvatama. He told her that her son was a Mahatma and he entreated her to look after him well. Sojourned at Pasalapudi ashram. The Balayogi put up with these varied torments for a full 2 months without letting them affect his tapas, but continued disturbances of this nature began to eventually affect his peace of mind. He would often restrain himself from going into samadhi lest his tormentors took advantage of his unconscious stage to inflict further tortures upon him. On such occasions, when he was in deep dhyana but not in samadhi, he often caught people in the act of trying to beat him, in the mistaken belief that he was lost in samadhi. The startled culprits would then plead forgiveness, and he would let them go. Be that as it may, he finally got fed up and decided to move away from there, so that he could carry on his tapas undisturbed. Ruminating in his mind as to where he would find a peaceful place for his tapas, he remembered having heard of an ashram at Pasalapudi, a village approximately 8 kilometers from Adivarapupeta, where a sadhu was reputed to be engaged in tapas. Hoping that this ashram might meet his requirement, he left for Pasalapudi at 10 p.m. one October night, barely 2 months after he had begun his tapas. He found the ashram that he was looking for, but as he entered, the sadhu who was inside began making weird noises. Apparently, the sadhu had assumed that some vagabond youngster was trying to gain entry into the ashram by stealth, and he had made these noises to frighten him away. The Balayogi, on the other hand, interpreted the strange behavior of the sadhu to imply that the sadhu did not want to be disturbed, and so the young yogi withdrew and came and sat outside. Now it so happened that during those days, communist bands used to roam the countryside in that area trying to terrorize the villagers. In self-defense, every village had organized posses of armed men who used to patrol the areas around their respective villages and apprehend any suspicious characters whom they may find loitering in or around the village. One such posse happened to pass by the ashram and saw this young boy, who was obviously a stranger, sitting outside. They immediately surrounded the boy and started interrogating him. In the state of mind in which he was, the Balayogi could barely comprehend what was going on, let alone answer their questions coherently. This strange behavior of the boy further aroused the suspicion of the villagers, and an ugly situation might have developed. Fortunately, just then one of the men recognized the boy as the Balayogi of Adivarapupeta. When the posse learned that the Balayogi had come to Pasalapudi to stay at the ashram, they called out the manager of the ashram and had the Balayogi conducted inside. After accommodating the young yogi, the manager asked him what sadhana he was practicing. The Balayogi could hardly give a satisfactory reply because he had followed no specific sadhana. He had simply become immersed in the samadhi as a result of the divine touch of his guru. So he simply answered, "I don't know." "If that be the case," said the manager pompously, "I shall initiate you. From now on, repeat the mantra, Sadguru, at all times." With that, he left him and went back to bed. Balayogi, at last finding himself alone and undisturbed, went back into samadhi. The next morning, the manager came to see him again and promptly inquired whether the Balayogi had done japa of the mantra he had given him. When the Balayogi replied in the negative, the manager was visibly annoyed. Kari Subireddy, who is the president of the Pasalapudi village council and who was also controlled the running of the ashram, visited the ashram later in the morning. On seeing him arrive, the sadhu who was staying there got up deferentially, did namaskar, and urged the Balayogi to do the same. However, the Balayogi continued sitting unconcerned, immersed in dhyana. Reddy, who was full of his own self-importance, felt offended at being ignored in this manner. Barely suppressing his annoyance, he curtly asked the Balayogi what diet he was taking. The Balayogi replied that his diet was restricted to milk only. Thereupon, he peremptorily told the Balayogi that milk could not be made available to him and that he need not stay in the ashram any longer. The attitude of these ashram functionaries made it quite apparent to the Balayogi that his presence there was not welcome, so he decided to return to Adivarapupeta. He started soon after dusk, and by 10 p.m. he was back in his native village after a brief absence of only 24 hours. On reaching the village, he did not return to his original location. Instead, he went and sat under a banyan tree on the piece of land which belonged to his uncle. One morning, when the people of Adivarapupeta learned that their Balayogi was back, they were overjoyed and came in large numbers for his darshan. The tempest. The East Godavari district, being near the sea, is often subjected to cyclonic storms. One such storm of unusual intensity struck the region sometime in November 1949. A severe gale, followed by torrential rain, swept across the countryside, starting at about 2:30 a.m. It continued unabated until 5:30 a.m. Trees were uprooted, houses collapsed, the whole area was flooded, and people were in great distress. In such calamitous conditions, Mother Parvatama naturally feared for her son's safety, and so she ran to where he was sitting, even while the storm was in full swing. It was a rash thing to do, and she narrowly escaped death when a large branch torn off by the hurricane struck her a glancing blow on the head. Though stunned by the blow, she soon recovered and, spurred on by her anxiety for her son, somehow managed to reach the banyan tree where the Balayogi was sitting. To her great wonder, on reaching there, she found that the spot around the Balayogi was an oasis of peace amidst the raging turmoil elsewhere. The Balayogi was immersed in deep dhyana, undisturbed by the havoc all around him. The place where he sat remained calm and clean, and not a leaf was disturbed under the banyan tree. Relieved and not a little astonished, Mother Parvatama went and sat near him. As the storm abated and the day dawned, she discovered in the growing light that swarms of large red ants had taken refuge in the area where the Balayogi sat. The Balayogi's body was also covered in thick clusters of these ants. This greatly perturbed Mother Parvatama, and she started brushing the ants off his body. But the Balayogi told her by a sign not to do so and to leave them undisturbed where they were. Moved to burial ground. The Balayogi continued his tapas under the banyan tree, but once again he found himself the victim of harassment by the children of the village and even by some of the older people who were not kindly disposed towards him. During the day, these people dared not to do anything, as there was a constant stream of visitors coming for the darshan of the yogi. However, they got their opportunity at night when the visitors and those looking after the Balayogi went home, and the Balayogi was left all by himself. He was thinking one day on what steps he should take to get rid of this nuisance, when it occurred to the Balayogi that if he shifted to the village burial ground, these misguided people would be afraid of following him there, particularly at night, and he might thus obtain peace. So on 18th November 1949, the Balayogi shifted the venue of his tapas to the burial ground on the outskirts of the village. His intuition proved correct, because people generally look upon burial and cremation grounds with awe and fear, and try to avoid these places if they can. Because of this fear, no one dared to go near the burial ground at night, and so the Balayogi was thus relieved of their harassment. But this relief was short-lived, for he soon discovered that the burial ground swarmed with insects and rodents who were habituated to feeding on the flesh of the dead bodies buried there. When these insects and rodents came across the Balayogi seated motionless in samadhi for hours at a stretch, they naturally took him to be a corpse and started nibbling at his flesh, causing any number of wounds, particularly in the lower parts of his body which rested on the ground. Then, when the Balayogi went for his daily bath in the canal, the fish in the water would nibble at these open wounds. In effect, what it amounted to was that through the shifting his location, he found relief from the mental harassment caused by the mischievous boys, but he had to pay for it in physical suffering caused by the insects, rodents, and reptiles inhabiting the burial ground.
Spiritual Ministration, Chapter 3, Tapas of the Four Directions, Part 1. Balayogi bitten by cobra. In December 1949, approximately 15 days after he had shifted to the burial ground, the Balayogi was proceeding to the canal for his daily midnight bath, when a deadly black cobra, which was lying across his path, reared up and bit him viciously on his leg. Blood had started dripping from the wound, but the Balayogi ignored it, took his bath and returned to his seat in the burial ground and went back into samadhi. To begin with, the Balayogi showed total unconcern and paid no heed to the snake bite. However, this venom injected by the serpent was bound to react on the body, and so it happened. At first there was a discoloration of the skin, causing blotches to appear all over the body. Soon thereafter, gangrene set in, as a result of which the body started emanating a foul smell. The pain and discomfort that the Balayogi had to suffer on account of all this could well be imagined. Coming on top of all his other troubles, the physical suffering caused by the snake bite proved to be the last straw. Discouraged and frustrated by all that he had endured and was enduring, he decided to give up his yogic practices and return home. In any case, it had never been his intention or ambition to tread the yogic path. The tapas he was presently undergoing
was at the behest of the Jangam Vaiseshadri, whom he had come to regard as his guru. He now felt that the yogic way of life he was following was not worth all the trouble. It was better to return home and to lead a normal life. With such thoughts running through his mind, the Balayogi left his seat and started off for his home. Now the fact was that without any previous resolve on his part, Satyaraju had been made to enter the tapomarg. Hence it could hardly be expected that he would be left to his discretion to leave it off at his own will. And so it happened. As the Balayogi neared a banyan tree which stood on the path leading to his home, he suddenly espied the Jangam Vaiseshadri, his guru, standing under the tree barring his way. Seeing his guru, the Balayogi did namaskar to him. With a faint smile, the guru asked the boy where he was going. "I am going home," said the Balayogi. "Why?" asked the guru. Thereupon the Balayogi recounted all the woes and troubles he had to endure ever since he started his yogic practices. He told him all the suffering he was undergoing on account of the snake bite, and ended up saying that he found it impossible to continue his tapas and was going home. The Guru heard him out in silence, and thereafter continued looking at the boy for some time. When he finally spoke, he told his young disciple to go back and directed him not to abandon the yogic path under any circumstance. He then imparted to the Balayogi the Panchakshari mantra and told him to repeat it daily. He assured the Balayogi that the action of this mantra would relieve him of the suffering caused by the snake bite, and he would soon be restored to normal health. In obedience to his Guru's wishes, the Balayogi returned to his seat in the burial ground. He felt somewhat abashed at the passing weakness which had induced him to leave for his home, and he resolved then and there that he would prefer to die following the yogic path rather than be called a yoga brashta, or one who has failed in the path of yoga. In order to stiffen his resolve for the future, he took a solemn vow never to swerve from the path shown by his Guru. Enthused afresh by the blessings of his Guru and with firm resolve, the Balayogi started chanting the Panchakshari mantra. He soon passed into deep samadhi, and as his Guru predicted, the repetition of the mantra neutralized the effects of the poison and restored him to his former health. Collector and Tehsildar come for darshan. The news that the Balayogi of Adivarapupeta had survived the inevitably fatal bite of a deadly cobra spread far and wide, and soon reached the ears of Sri Palasundaram Pillai, the then collector of the East Godavari district. Pillai was a deep religious man, and this news, coupled with other news that he had been hearing about the Balayogi, awoke in him the desire to have darshan of this young saint. He had also learned that the Balayogi remained absorbed in samadhi for almost the entire 24 hours, and that he only emerged from his samadhi around midnight, when he took his daily bath and partook some light nourishment that may have been placed there for him. Accordingly, sometime in January 1950, the collector, accompanied by his personal assistant, Sri T.V. Satyanarayan Rao, and the Tehsildar of Ramachandrapuram, Sri Garga Narasimha Murthy, came one day at midnight to the burial ground for the Balayogi's darshan. No one had been informed of this visit. The Balayogi had just then emerged from samadhi, so they were able to converse with him. Before taking his leave, the collector asked the Balayogi if there was anything he could do for him, as it was customary to sit on a deer skin or a tiger skin while doing tapas. The Balayogi asked the collector to send a tiger skin for his use. By a fortunate coincidence, a poacher had been apprehended a few days earlier, and a tiger skin found in his possession at the time of his arrest, and that had been confiscated from him. This was now lying in the collectorate. The collector sent for this tiger skin the very next day through Narasimha Murthy, the Tehsildar. When Narasimha Murthy came to the burial ground to deliver the tiger skin, he found that the ground in which the Balayogi sat was damp, It became obvious to him that if the tiger skin were to be spread on the damp ground, it would soon start rotting and emanating a foul odor. In order to obviate this, he had a wooden platform constructed for the Balayogi to sit on, and on this he spread the tiger skin. He also got a pandal, or improvised hut of palmyra leaves, built to cover the wooden platform. The elevated seat provided by the wooden platform relieved the Balayogi from the torments of rodents, ants and insects to a greater extent, and he was now able to continue his tapas in relatively greater comfort. Construction of Dhyana Mandir. Soon after this, his first darshan of the Balayogi, Balasundaram Pillai, the collector, was posted out. Prior to his departure, he came once again for darshan. As on the previous occasion, his personal assistant and the Tahsildar accompanied him. T.V. Satyanarayan Rao, the PA, was by now deeply impressed by the young yogi, and before leaving the next day, he discussed with Narasimha Murthy a proposal to construct a Dhyana Mandir for the Balayogi's use. The land adjoining the burial ground belonged to the Zamindar of Bella village, Vatakuta Pattabhiraman by name. When the Tahsildar and the PA discussed the matter with this Zamindar, he readily consented to the construction of the proposed Dhyana Mandir on his land. In the meantime, the Balayogi continued his tapas in the improvised hut that had been constructed in the burial ground with undiminished intensity. As he sat motionless in samadhi day after day for almost the entire period of 24 hours, his hands and legs became stiff and wooden, and he soon lost control of them. By the time he completed his first year tapas around July to August 1950, he found it impossible to even move from his seat. In order to enable him to perform his daily ablutions, a bucket of water had to be brought and placed outside his hut. With great difficulty and with the exercise of immense willpower and determination, he would barely manage to drag himself to where the bucket was placed and have his bath. He would then return to his seat and resume his samadhi. Notwithstanding all his suffering, he carried on with his tapas undeterred. At around October 1950, the Dhyana Mandir was ready, and the Balayogi was bodily lifted and carried to his new abode. At about the same time, a person named Ramakrishna Reddy had a well dug near the newly constructed Dhyana Mandir. This well not only catered to the needs of the Balayogi, but also served to provide pure drinking water for the rest of the village. By now, Narasimha Murthy, the Tahsildar, had voluntarily assumed the responsibility of looking after the needs of the Balayogi. In order to ensure that the Balayogi was not disturbed during his tapas, Narasimha Murthy directed that the door of the Dhyana Mandir would henceforth be closed and locked. The key of the lock was kept with his mother Parvatama. From now on, he also sent regular donations of money to Mother Parvatama to meet the cost of buying fruits and milk for the Balayogi. These donations were continued by him for the entire period of the Balayogi's tapas and even after. We are told that Narasimha Murthy was the only person who could arouse the Balayogi from samadhi. All he had to do was gently tap the Balayogi anywhere on his person, and it was enough to bring the yogi back to normal consciousness. It goes without saying that Narasimha Murthy only did this when it became imperative and unavoidable. Visit of Tapasviji Maharaj. During this period, there lived a saint popularly known amongst his followers and admirers as Tapasviji Maharaj. This yogi was remarkable in many ways. He was born in the royal family of the erstwhile Patiala state. After a full life of action and adventure, the prince took to sannyas in his 50th year and entered the Udasi sect of sannyasins with the monastic name of Vishnudham. He practiced rigorous spiritual disciplines for a long time under the guidance of various gurus. Once, when he was on a visit to Parashuram Kund in Assam, he met a sadhu who claimed that he had learnt the almost forgotten secret of Kayakalpa, the art of rejuvenating the human body. but that he had not yet tried it out on anybody. Tapasviji, who was by now nearing his 90th year and had started suffering from the debility of old age, volunteered to submit to this treatment. The course of treatment was to last a period of 3 months. After approximately 21 days of starting this treatment, Tapasviji passed into a comatose state, and when he recovered from his coma sometime toward the end of the 3-month period, he found to his astonishment that he had been restored to the same state of health and youthful vigor he had enjoyed as a young man of 30. Tapasviji underwent the Kayakalpa treatment twice more, once at the age of 120 years and the second time at the age of 150 years. Eventually, he entered Mahasamadhi in Jhansi on 12th October 1955 at the ripe old age of 187 years. During his long life, Tapasviji successfully undertook a number of spiritual austerities, including the Kadeshwari tapas and the Panchagni tapas. It was in recognition of these spiritual accomplishments that he had come to be known as Tapasviji Maharaj by his devotees. Only a brief life sketch of Tapasviji Maharaj has been given here. Those interested in more details about his life are advised to read his biography, The Life of Tapasviji Maharaj by Sri T.S. Anantamurthy. In January 1951, Tapasviji Maharaj happened to come on a visit to Vishnu Sevashram, located on the Pitapuram road in Kakinada. There he heard about the Balayogi of Adivarapupeta and expressed a desire to meet him. Consequently, in this first week of January 1951, Tapasviji Maharaj, accompanied by Bulusu Sambamurthy, the then Speaker of the Madras Legislative Assembly, came to Adivarapupeta from Kakinada and had special darshan of the Balayogi. At the time of their visit, the Balayogi was in deep samadhi, and hence Tapasviji could not converse with him. Nevertheless, Tapasviji Maharaj immediately realized the high spiritual status of the Balayogi. He sent for some flowers and devotedly placed them at the feet of the Balayogi, and instructed his companions to do the same. Deeply impressed by this first darshan, Tapasviji Maharaj came again on a number of subsequent visits, but it so happened that every time he came, he found the Balayogi immersed in samadhi. On one such occasion, Tapasviji sat in front of the Balayogi and went into dhyana to find out the antecedents of the yogi. On emerging from dhyana, he informed his companions that the Balayogi was a Siddha Purush who had reincarnated himself of his own free will for the spiritual regeneration of mankind. He further told them that in one of his former incarnations, the Balayogi had been born as Sri Chandra, the son of Guru Nanak and the founder of the Udasi sect of sannyasis. In that birth, he, Tapasvi Maharaj, had been one of Sri Chandra's disciples. The companions of Tapasvi Maharaj were naturally awestruck and filled with wonder when they were told this facts by the venerable saint. One day, Mother Parvatama informed the Balayogi about the frequent visits of Tapasviji Maharaj and his keen desire to meet him. The Balayogi readily agreed to this meeting, and the news was conveyed to Tapasviji Maharaj at Kakinada. Tapasviji Maharaj came the very next day, and this time when he arrived, the Balayogi was not in samadhi. When Tapasviji Maharaj entered the Dhyana Mandir, the Balayogi did namaskar with folded hands. In fact, so far the Balayogi had continued to follow the customary practice of greeting all his elders by doing namaskar to them. But when he greeted Tapasviji in this manner, the saint reverently told the Balayogi, "You are a Mahatma, whereas I am only an ordinary sadhu. You must not do namaskar to me. In fact, you must not do namaskar to anybody in the future." From that day, the Balayogi discontinued the practice of greeting his elders by doing namaskar. Tapasviji then sat on the wooden platform facing the Balayogi and had a heart-to-heart chat with him. Among other things, he told the Balayogi that he had met a number of tapasvis in the Himalayas who were engaged in similar tapas as the Balayogi, and that all of them took some form of regular nourishment, albeit in limited quantities. He therefore advised the Balayogi to take a measured quantity of milk every day. If he did not do so, and if he continued to starve himself as he was doing at present, it was very likely that his body would perish for for want of nourishment within the next 15 to 20 days. Before leaving, Tapasviji bought a cow and presented it to Mother Parvatama so she could have an assured supply of milk for the Balayogi. Later, at a public meeting held in his honor at Kakinada, Tapasviji Maharaj extolled the spiritual status of the Balayogi of Adivarapupeta in highly laudatory terms, and also informed his audience that the Balayogi had been his guru in a previous incarnation. Such eulogy from a deeply venerated saint like Tapasviji Maharaj naturally raised the Balayogi in the esteem of the people in the area, and they began to flock to Adivarapupeta in greater numbers for his darshan. Sometime later that year, 1951, the Balayogi was suddenly afflicted with a burning sensation all over his body. The agony became unbearable, and although he clenched his teeth and made a determined effort to retain mastery over his emotions, tears began to involuntarily stream from his eyes. While he was thus writhing and weeping in pain, he passed into samadhi. Though he was now unconscious of the intense pain, his body continued to burn and became hot to the touch, as though it was scorched from within. At the same time, a foul smell began to emanate from it. At this time, Tapasviji Maharaj was residing at the ashram in the Nandi Hills near Bangalore. He saw the plight of the Balayogi in his dhyana and immediately left by train for Kakinada with a bottle of medicated oil he himself had prepared. From Kakinada he came straight to the Dhyana Mandir and with his own hands applied the oil he had brought to the Balayogi's body. The application of this oil immediately relieved the burning sensation, and the bad smell emanating from the body also disappeared. Tapasviji later explained that someone out of hatred or jealousy had practiced black magic on the Balayogi, and the burning sensation and smell were caused by that. That apart, as the Balayogi used to sit in almost continuous samadhi with his palms joined and his fingers interlocked, they had gradually become stiff and rigid, and eventually they got locked in that position. With the application of the oil brought by Tapasviji Maharaj, a certain degree of suppleness and flexibility was restored to the palms of his hands, and he was eventually able to separate them, though he still had no control over his limbs. Tapasviji Maharaj again visited the Balayogi in the month of October 1952. On this visit, he offered to impart the Surya Upasana mantra to the Balayogi, and the Balayogi readily agreed. Accordingly, on the Kartika Purnima of the year 1952, Tapasviji Maharaj initiated the Balayogi in this mantra. During the same period, the Balayogi's divine guru appeared in one of his periodic visitations. The Balayogi informed him of what happened, and the guru approved of his doing japa of the Surya mantra, but told him that the mantra imparted by Tapasviji was incomplete. He then initiated him into the full and proper mantra. When the Balayogi next met Tapasviji Maharaj, he informed him of this error in omission and in imparting the Surya mantra, and Tapasviji readily admitted his error. From then on, the Balayogi started doing the japa of the Surya mantra daily for 2 hours, and the rest of the time he spent in his normal tapas. The Dhyana Mandir, which had been constructed for the Balayogi, was a small single-room structure measuring 12 by 12 feet. It had no windows or ventilators, as the door was kept locked in order to prevent disturbance. It became very hot and stuffy inside the room. During the summer months particularly, the heat inside was almost unbearable. Sri Gargar Narasimhamurthy discussed this problem one day with Tapasviji Maharaj and asked him what should be done about it. Tapasviji suggested that a gopuram be built on top of the Dhyana Mandir. In accordance with Tapasviji's directions, a gopuram was constructed by Seshagiri Rao, an engineer who happened to be one of his disciples. The gopuram was completed on the day of Mahashivratri of 1953, and thereafter the effects of the heat caused by the burning rays of the sun were greatly reduced inside the Dhyana Mandir. Siddhi and Sakshatkara. The divine guru whom the Balayogi continued to regard as a Sadguru of the Jangam Devar sect, up to almost the very end of his tapas, used to visit his disciple once in every 3-4 months, sometimes sooner, in case the particular necessity arose. The main purpose of these visits was to give fresh directions for the continuance of the tapas, or to remove any difficulties or obstacles that may crop up from time to time, or to infuse fresh courage and enthusiasm into the young disciple whenever he felt disheartened or his resolve wavered. As had been mentioned earlier, around July-August 1950, he had barely completed 1 year of his tapas. The Balayogi had lost control over his limbs, as a result of which he found it impossible to attend to even the basic minimum requirements of taking nourishment or having a bath or attending to his bodily functions. The Balayogi endured this crippling handicap for 3 long years, but sometime in June 1953 got sick and tired of it all, so to speak, went on strike. He stopped his daily spiritual practices and discontinued his samadhi and just sat around in a dejected mood. Sure enough, this brought the Divine Guru promptly onto the scene, and even though he must have known what was irking the boy, he asked in a teasing mood what was troubling him now. The Balayogi seized on this opportunity to give vent to all his frustrations and told the Guru of the difficulties he was facing on account of his incapacitated limbs. As usual, the Guru smiled benignly and ran his hands over the arms and legs of his disciple. Lo and behold, no sooner had he done that than the limbs, which had been virtually crippled for almost 3 years, were now whole again and once more perfectly under control. The Balayogi found to his relief that he could move about once again and could attend to his basic needs without the requirement of assistance. Whereas the rest of his limbs became normal, the fingers of his hands continued to remain bent, as over the years the flesh of the joints had grown into each other in such a way that they had become permanently bent and remain thus to this day. The Balayogi now resumed his tapas with fresh vigor. Around the end of September, beginning of October 1953, he went into deep Nirvikalpa Samadhi. This Samadhi became continuous, and even the short break that he used to take every day at midnight for his daily bath and refreshment was dispensed with. The Balayogi remained thus in continuous Samadhi for 1 whole month. On the night of Wednesday, the 28th of October 1953, he was aroused from his deep absorption by a tap on his leg. As he slowly returned to consciousness, he became aware of a bright effulgence of intense luminosity, illuminating the entire Dhyana Mandir. He gradually began to perceive that this effulgence was emanating from a divine presence, but it was so intense that he found it difficult to look in that direction. Then, as his eyes got accustomed to the light, he beheld, standing before him, the snow-white and divinely beautiful form of Shankara Bhagavan. The Balayogi's whole being thrilled at that wonderful vision, and his heart overflowed with joy. Though thus enraptured, the Balayogi was nevertheless perplexed as to the identity of this obviously divine person, because he had never seen nor heard of anyone like him before. He intuitively felt within his heart that the person standing before him was none other than the great god Shankara. But in order to confirm whether his intuition was correct or not, he asked the divine being who he was. Maheshwara gave an amused smile and said, "They call me Shankar Mahadev." Lord Shiva then expressed appreciation of the resolute manner in which the Balayogi had carried out his tapas, and asked him if he required anything or whether he wanted to ask for any boon. The Balayogi replied that he wanted nothing, nor did he wish to solicit any boon. Shankara Bhagavan then sat on the wooden platform opposite the Balayogi and conversed with him for some time. Finally, telling him that his Guru would come and direct him what to do next, Shankara Bhagavan then disappeared. The Balayogi spent the rest of the night quietly in ecstatic contemplation of the divine vision that had been vouchsafed to him. This Sakshatkara, or realization of his Ishtadeva, established the Balayogi as a Siddha Purush, realized soul, and marked the culmination of the first phase of his tapas.
Before I begin the reading of the second part of Chapter 3 of Spiritual Ministration. I beg the indulgence of the audience while I editorialize for a few moments. For those who have been with me for the last few readings, you find that they describe the greatness, strength of character, and the many, many great qualities of Sri Sri Shivabalayogi Maharaj. To those who think I am biased when I say this, I have only this to say. All the media of description, all the words and languages in the universe are not enough to describe the true greatness of a guru who frees you from the sorrows of material life. How can I, with my many inadequacies, hope to convey Swamiji's greatness? But I digress. The next reading describes the time in Swamiji's tapas when things got extremely difficult. However, for all our sakes, he persisted through the suffering. He truly exemplifies in this chapter the attitude of either you become a yogi or you die. I hope this reading can inspire more people to take on and stay on the path of meditation, as it inspires me daily. Without further ado, I will now begin to read Chapter 3, Spiritual Ministration, Tapas of the Four Directions. Yuga Tapas, Dik Tapas, and Dik Siddhi. According to the Yoga Shastra, a period of 12 years is known as a Yuga Parva, and Yuga Tapas entails doing tapas for a full 12 years. During the course of this Yuga Tapas, a yogi is required to do tapas facing each of the four directions in turn. This is known as Dik Tapas. Each particular direction has its own specific mantra which is repeated when doing tapas of that direction. The tapas of a particular direction is to be continued until Siddhi is attained. This is known as Dik Siddhi. The peculiarities of tapas of each of the four directions are summarized very briefly below. A. Eastern direction. When doing tapas of this direction, the yogi has to face problems and difficulties, but these are comparatively speaking of a minor nature. Siddhi is gained soonest by doing tapas facing east. Northern direction. This is the best direction from the point of view of ease of dhyana. The yogi faces little or no problems or obstacles, enjoys good health and experiences anand or bliss during dhyana. Western direction. This is the most difficult direction for doing tapas and is fraught with danger. The yogi has to cope with seemingly insuperable mental obstacles and or endure almost unbearable physical afflictions. In addition, he is also subjected to severe tests. Southern direction. This is a neutral direction having no particular benefits or obstacles. Dhyana continues normally, there being neither ananda or ashanti, or lack of peace. Tapas and Siddhi of the eastern direction. During the initial few years, the divine guru gave no formal instructions to his disciples to sit facing toward any particular direction. However, as a result of his unspoken will, it soon came to pass that the Balayogi sat facing east for the first 4 years of his tapas. That is from 7th August 1949 to 28th October 1953. Consequently, when the Balayogi attained Siddhi on 28th October 1953, he also attained the Dik Siddhi of the eastern direction. Tapas of the northern direction. At midnight on 29th October 1953, the Divine Guru again appeared before the Balayogi. The Balayogi recounted to his guru all that had transpired the previous night, the darshan he had of Shankar Bhagavan and the conversation that took place between him and Bhagavan. The guru appeared well pleased with all that he heard. He then told the Balayogi that as he had acquired the siddhi of the eastern direction, he must now resume tapas facing north. He instructed him to discontinue japa of the Panchakshari mantra and imparted to him a new mantra appropriate for tapas of the northern direction. That apart, he instructed the Balayogi to observe mauna from that day onward. Having thus initiated him into tapas of the northern direction, the Guru disappeared. One of the results of gaining siddhi of the Panchakshari mantra was that the Balayogi as of that day became immune to the venom of snakes and other poisonous creatures. He experienced a dramatic demonstration of this beneficial effect shortly after he commenced tapas of the northern direction. One night while he was proceeding to the well for his usual midnight bath, a nag or cobra bit him on the leg and stuck to it. Undaunted, the Balayogi pulled the snake away and threw it to one side. This time, notwithstanding the vicious nature of the bite, the venom injected by the serpent had no effect, and he continued his tapas undisturbed. Surya Sakshatkara and visit to Surya Mandal. As recounted earlier from the Kartik Purnima of 1952, the Balayogi, with the approval of his Guru, had been doing japa of the Surya Mantra for 2 hours daily. This continued for almost 2 years. Then in the month of Kartik, October 1954, the Divine Guru appeared one night on one of his periodic visits and told the Balayogi that his japa of the Surya Mantra would soon bear fruit and that 10 days hence Surya Dev would manifest before him. And so it came to pass on the Kartik Purnima of 1954. The Balayogi had Sakshatkara of Surya Dev and thereby gained siddhi of the Surya Mantra. The next night, the Divine Guru appeared again, and as was his wont, the Balayogi recounted to him the happenings of the previous night. After that, on a sudden impulse, the Balayogi asked his Guru if he could take him to the Surya Mandal or sphere of the sun. He wanted to see what it was like. The Guru readily agreed to take him there. Before starting, he instructed the Balayogi to close his eyes and not to open them until he, the Guru, told him to do so. The Balayogi thereupon closed his eyes. In no time at all, it seemed, the Guru told him to open his eyes again. When the Balayogi did so, he found himself looking down a landscape very similar to that of earth. He saw mountains clothed in forests and interspersed by rivers and river valleys. He also remembered having seen some of the mountain peaks covered with snow. After a brief sojourn, he asked to be taken back. However, for the return journey, he did not close his eyes. The Divine Guru made the Balayogi sit on the palm of his hand and then shot back towards earth with almost the speed of thought. On the way back, he had to pass through the blazing orb of the sun. They flashed past in the fraction of a second, but the heat was so intense that the Balayogi felt that he would have been reduced to a cinder had it not been for the protection of his Divine Guru. Notwithstanding this protection, and even though the exposure to the fiery orb was for the briefest possible time, the Balayogi suffered intensely from the heat. Therefore, in order to give his disciple relief, the Divine Guru gave him a dip in every river that they happened to cross in both the astral sphere as also on earth. As the Balayogi had never so far travelled away from home, he did not recognize any of these rivers. The only river he recognized was the Godavari when they dipped in it near Rajamundri. This process of bathing in all the rivers that they passed appears to have established a precedent, because ever since then, Sri Swamiji, as the Balayogi is now called, cannot resist having a dip in any and every river that he happens to cross over. Recalling this experience in later years, after he had completed the full 12 years tapas, Sri Swamiji said, "It is possible in the state of Samadhi to travel to the Surya Mandal and return alive. This is my own experience. Those wishing to achieve this can do so by practicing dhyana." In the same context, he cautioned those who aspire solely for such experiences that people should strive for Atmajnana or self-knowledge, and they should strive to know themselves in their true nature, which alone will bring peace to the world. Sakshatkara or Siddhi of the northern direction. The tapas facing north proceeded apace. During this entire period, the Balayogi enjoyed good health and experienced great bliss during Samadhi. Around 15th July 1955, the Balayogi once again went into deep Nirvikalpa Samadhi, which continued without a break for 15 days. On the night of 1st August 1955, the Balayogi had once again had Sakshatkara of Shankar Bhagavan, and thus attained Siddhi of the northern direction. As on the previous occasion, Shankar Bhagavan conversed with the Balayogi for some time. Before leaving, Shiva asked him if he wanted anything, but the Balayogi replied that he desired nothing. Bhagavan then disappeared. Tapas of the western direction. Though the Balayogi attained Sakshatkara and Siddhi of the northern direction on 1st August 1955, his Guru did not appear immediately to give fresh directions for the continuance of the tapas. Knowing the rigors that lay ahead, the Guru apparently wanted his disciple to rest and recoup for a few days before starting on the next phase of tapas. So the Balayogi had a break and rest from 1st to 6th August 1955. On the midnight of 7th August 1955, the Divine Guru appeared again. He informed his disciple that in the next phase he would be required to do tapas facing west. He warned the Balayogi that he would have to face many difficulties and obstacles in this phase of tapas, which may at times be severe, but he should not lose heart and must on no account give up. He then reassured his disciple that whenever he needed help, he, the Guru, would come to his assistance. Finally, he imparted to the Balayogi the appropriate mantra for tapas in the western direction, and with a parting of good cheer, the Divine Guru disappeared. When he warned his disciples about the dangers that lay ahead, the Divine Guru was reiterating and reaffirming the warnings contained in the scriptures about the dangers and difficulties that lie in store for a yogi who undertakes tapas of the western direction. Many well-known tapasvis have come to grief when doing tapas of the western direction. The best known instance of this being the great sage Vishwamitra, for it is said that it was while doing tapas of the western direction that the Apsara Menaka seduced Vishwamitra and thereby succeeded in making him break off his tapas. Be that as it may, the Balayogi got a foretaste of what was in store for him on the very next day of his starting the tapas, for suddenly and inexplicably he developed a severe stomachache. Then, as if this was not bad enough, he was once again afflicted by the burning sensation he had experienced earlier. Agonizing as they were, these were only the beginning of a series of bodily afflictions that the Balayogi would have to suffer almost continuously throughout the entire period of this phase of his tapas. On 15th August 1955, i.e. within 8 days of the commencement of the western tapas, the cow that had been so far providing milk for the Balayogi suddenly died. A new cow was bought, but that too died within the next 15 days. As soon as a cow would be bought for the Balayogi, or any cow whose milk would be procured for the Balayogi, would die. This posed a big problem, as the only nourishment that the Balayogi was taking was a measured quantity of milk once a day at midnight. To compound this problem, the Balayogi soon developed nausea for milk and would immediately throw up any milk that he tried to consume. As a consequence, he was soon reduced to carrying on his rigorous tapas without any nourishment at all. Obviously, the state of affairs could not continue for long. Some way had to be found out of this impasse, and that too soon, else the Balayogi was unlikely to survive for long. The dilemma was finally resolved by D. Sillayamma, the wife of D. Ramakrishna Reddy, who hit upon the idea of substituting Horlicks in place of the daily glass of fresh milk. When this was tried, to the immense relief of all his devotees, the Balayogi was able to consume the glass of Horlicks without any adverse effects, and so a major problem was thus resolved. From that day onward, for the entire duration of his tapas in the western direction, the Balayogi subsisted solely on his daily glass of Horlicks. On 12th October 1955, Tapasviji Maharaj attained Mahasamadhi at Jhansi, but the Balayogi was not yet aware of this sad fact. At midnight of the same day, as the Balayogi opened the door to the Dhyana Mandir to go for his daily bath, he saw a huge Nag, serpent of the cobra family, with a shimmering amber hue, lying coiled up across the doorway. The moment this Nag saw the Balayogi, it reared up with a loud hiss and, spreading its massive hood, began to sway to and fro, intently watching the movements of the Balayogi. Now it is an inviolable rule in the cult of the yogis that when faced with any obstacle in their path, they may either remove it or they may avoid it by going around it, but they must never be deterred into turning back, particularly if such action smacks of fear. Thus it happened that when the Balayogi found this Nag barring his path, he calmly looked around for a way to circumvent it, but there was no way he could do so. Finally, finding no alternative, he stepped on the coiled body of the serpent and walked across. That, of course, was asking for trouble, and with an angry hiss, the Nag bit the Balayogi on his left thigh. Undeterred, the Balayogi proceeded to the well and had his bath. When he returned to the Dhyana Mandir after completing his bath, he found the Nag still there coiled up across the doorway. Once again, he had no alternative but to step across the Nag in order to re-enter the Dhyana Mandir. And this time also the Nag bit him. The second bite was on the big toe of his right foot. Unperturbed by what happened, the Balayogi closed the door of the Dhyana Mandir, preparatory to resuming his samadhi. But by this time, the poison of the two bites had begun to take effect, and before he could take up his asana, he fell unconscious on the wooden platform. The Balayogi had earlier informed those looking for him that during the current phase of his tapas, they could enter the Dhyana Mandir only on the third Saturday of every month between 7 p.m. and midnight for cleaning and other purposes, and to receive specific instructions that the Balayogi may wish to convey. On all other days, a glass of Horlicks was to be slipped in through the window. Nobody was permitted to enter or disturb the Balayogi in any way. The third Saturday of October 1955 was yet 4 days away, with the result that the Balayogi kept lying unconscious on the wooden platform all these days without anyone coming to know about it. Finally, at 6 p.m. on the fourth day after the snake bit him, which also happened to be the third Saturday of the month, the Divine Guru appeared and aroused the Balayogi from his unconscious state. The Balayogi sat up and resumed his usual asana, but he felt extremely weak as a consequence of the ordeal he had just gone through. At 7 p.m., Mother Parvatama and other members of the committee formed to look after the Balayogi entered the Dhyana Mandir. They found the milk of the past 4 days lying untouched. When they inquired from the Balayogi the reason, he conveyed to them by signs all that had transpired. He was then informed about the passing away of Tapasviji, and this news must have saddened him because he had developed great regard and affection for the venerable saint. The coincidence did not escape him that he was bitten by the Nag on the very day which Tapasviji attained Mahasamadhi. A point of digression here. By the repetition of the Panchakshari mantra, the Balayogi had undoubtedly obtained immunity from the venom of snakes and other poisonous creatures. But this Nag was no ordinary snake. It was the same Nag that hangs around the neck of Shankar Bhagavan in the form of a garland. When Shankar Bhagavan gave darshan to the Balayogi at the conclusion of his tapas, the Balayogi recognized the Nag and pointing to it, he told Shankar Bhagavan that this was the serpent that had bitten him. At that, the Nag hung its head in embarrassment. The Nag had obviously been sent by Shankar Bhagavan to test the yogi's fearlessness. Continuing on, throughout the entire period of his tapas of the western direction, the Balayogi continued to suffer from various ailments of the body. He could disregard these when in samadhi, because during that period he was unconscious of his body and its aches and pains. However, when he emerged from samadhi state, he became acutely aware of the pain caused by these afflictions, and this quite naturally caused him distress and ashanti, lack of peace. This ashanti had been aggravated by news he received from time to time of the passing away of friends and relatives and of various troubles being suffered by them. The Balayogi therefore decided that the best way of mitigating the suffering was to reduce the period when he was out of samadhi to the barest minimum, and to the extent possible to cut off contact with the outside world. With this in mind, he conveyed to his mother and to the members of the committee looking after him that he was passing through a difficult and crucial phase of his tapas, and hence he wished to be left completely undisturbed. He instructed them that if they found his body decomposing or emitting of the stench of death, then they should inter it and perform the last rites as prescribed for a yogi. Otherwise, he should be left strictly alone. Having sent them away with these grim instructions, the Balayogi shut himself in the Dhyana Mandir, and notwithstanding the extreme agony of his body that he had to suffer, he resolutely resumed his tapas. As was customary with yogis, when the Balayogi went to the well for his midnight bath, he used to carry with him his kamandalu, or water pot, and his yoga danda, or forked arm rest. One night, when he was halfway through his bath, a very old man came and asked the Balayogi to give him some water to drink. The Balayogi discontinued his bath and poured out water for the old man from his kamandalu. When the old man had drunk his fill, he asked the Balayogi his name. The Balayogi motioned with his hand that he did not know. The old man then asked the Balayogi to leave him home. The Balayogi then again conveyed by signs that this was not possible. Suddenly the old man flared up. Why do you keep making these signs? Why don't you speak to me? Come, you must accompany me to the village. With these words, he grabbed the Balayogi by the arm with surprising strength and began dragging him toward the Balayogi's former house in the village. This placed the Balayogi in a quandary, because due to the intensity of his tapas and because of the various illnesses that he had suffered, the Balayogi had barely enough strength left in his body to attend to his daily bath and other needs. He could hardly hope to resist this amazingly powerful old man. In desperation, therefore, he seized his yoga danda, and with all the strength that he could muster, he struck the old man a blow on his arm to make him release his vice-like grip. The yoga danda broke into two on impact, and at the same time the old Balayogi momentarily lost consciousness. When he recovered a minute or so later, he found that the old man had disappeared. Thinking no more of this incident, he completed his ablutions and returned to the Dhyana Mandir. To his surprise, he found the other half of the broken yoga danda lying on his tiger skin asana. The Balayogi then realized that the old man had come to test his resoluteness and strength of purpose. Some days later, once again at the time when the Balayogi was having his daily midnight bath, an entrancingly beautiful girl approached him at the well and requested for some water to drink. As he remained absorbed in contemplation at all times, it did not occur to the Balayogi to inquire what a beautiful young girl was doing at that time of night all alone at the village well. He simply drew some water, filled his kamandalu and poured it out for the girl to drink. All this while the girl tried in various ways to engage the Balayogi in conversation, but the Balayogi did not respond. She then tried various artful ways to get him to break his mauna and speak to her. but she was equally unsuccessful in this. With an apparent show of disappointment, she left the place, and the Balayogi, having finished his bath, wended his way back to the Dhyana Mandir compound. He found to his surprise the same girl standing on the path and barring his way. He tried to skirt around her, but whichever way he tried to go, she would run and playfully bar his way again. Nonplussed, the Balayogi went around and entered the compound from the southern door. As he approached the Dhyana Mandir, he heard the rhythmic and pleasing tinkling of nupur, or bells tied around the ankles and the waist when dancing, coming from within. Somewhat puzzled, he opened the door, and to his surprise and consternation, he discovered the same girl standing inside in dance pose. A strange luminosity appeared to emanate from her, which filled the inside of the Dhyana Mandir in a glow of light. Bathed in that light and standing in that graceful mudra, the girl looked captivating and divinely beautiful. Suddenly responding to the beat of some unseen choir, the girl broke into an ethereal and disturbingly alluring dance. By now the Balayogi had realized that this was another test he was being subjected to. So, ignoring the girl and her dance, he quickly sat down on his asana, closed his eyes, and withdrew his mind from external awareness, and was soon absorbed in samadhi. The above incident took place around 24th May 1956. The next night, the Divine Guru appeared, and the Balayogi related to him all that had happened since his last visit, particularly dwelling on the strange visitations of the old man and on the previous night of the dancing girl. The Guru simply smiled on hearing all this. He then told the Balayogi that he should now merge his mind in continuous samadhi and only emerge from it when Shankar Bhagavan came and aroused him from the samadhi state. He further added that Bhagavan would appear before him in about a month's time. After the Divine Guru left, the Balayogi told his mother to fetch the other members of the committee. When they arrived, he informed them that he would be in continuous samadhi for the next 1 month and that he was not to be disturbed during this period under any circumstances. He then sent them away and locked himself in. By now, he had completed well over 9 months of his tapas facing west. During this period, his body had been racked with illness and afflictions of all kinds, and it was by now on the verge of collapse. The skin had cracked open at a number of places, exposing deep fissures and wounds that used to bleed regularly. In fact, his body had reached the limit of its endurance, and it was a wonder that it kept going at all. But the woes of the body did not disturb the serenity of the Balayogi's mind, for he had long ago realized through direct personal experience that he was not the body but the indwelling Atman, which was not afflicted by the afflictions of the body. Firm in this realization, he continued his tapas totally indifferent to whether the body survived or whether it perished. But the worst was by now over, and the goal was in sight. He sat calm and unconcerned on his asana as directed by his Guru, and passed into deep Nirvikalpa Samadhi. Siddhi of the western direction. Nirvikalpa Samadhi continued without a break for 1 month. Then around 25th June 1956, the Balayogi felt a light tap on his person which slowly brought him back to consciousness. As he began to become aware of his surroundings, all he could see was a dazzling light. He could not quite decipher whether the light came from himself or was without. He was sunk in untellable peace and bliss, and he might have once again passed into samadhi when he felt another light tap. This time he opened his eyes, and there standing before him was, in Nataraj Swarup, were Girija and Nateshan, that is, Gauri and Shankar, dressed in the garb of jungle folk. The Sakshatkara of Gauri Shankar caused divine bliss to well up within the Balayogi, making him speechless with joy and wonder. As the Balayogi looked on with unsatiated gaze, Shankar Bhagavan said with an approving smile, "I have been trying to wake you up, but you would not get up." "Is that so?" replied the Balayogi, somewhat surprised. "I knew or felt nothing at all until you tapped me." Then both Nateshan and Girija sat opposite the Balayogi on his tapas platform and talked to him for a while. Finally, Shankar Bhagavan told the Balayogi that he should continue his tapas until he completed the full period of 12 years. After that, he would tell the Balayogi what he wanted him to do. Natesh and Girija then disappeared. Tapas of the southern direction. The Balayogi obtained Sakshatkara of Gauri Shankar and Siddhi of the western direction on 25th June 1956. The next night, i.e. 26th June 1956, the Divine Guru then appeared and told him to sit facing south and to commence the tapas of the southern direction. He then vanished. The month-long samadhi from which he had emerged had cured all the bodily affliction of the Balayogi, and he was now at ease both in body and mind. He had to face no serious obstacles, and his tapas continued undisturbed. However, serpents of the Nag family had dogged his path from the very beginning of his tapas and continued to do so during this period. He encountered a Nag one midnight sitting across his path, and when he was proceeding to the well for his bath. Unconcerned, he picked up the Nag and threw it aside. In this process, the Nag bit him in the hand, but the venom had no effect on the Balayogi. Sakshatkara and Siddhi of the southern direction. The tapas of the southern direction continued for a little over 10 months. In May 1957, the Balayogi again had Sakshatkara of Shankar Bhagavan, and this marked the attainment by him of Siddhi of the southern direction. With the completion of the tapas of the southern direction, the Balayogi attained Dik Siddhi of all 4 directions. According to the Yoga Shastras, it required a minimum period of 4 years to attain Siddhi of any direction, which means it would take a minimum of 16 years of tapas to attain Siddhi of all the 4 directions. As compared to this, the Balayogi attained Dik Siddhi of all 4 directions in little less than 8 years, which in itself is an indicator of his spiritual eminence and of the perseverance and resolute will in doggedly following the Tapo Marg in accordance with the directions of his Divine Guru. Chapter 4, Spiritual Ministration. Completion of Yoga Tapas. On the day following his attainment of Siddhi of the southern direction, the attainment of Dik Siddhi of all 4 directions by the Balayogi was celebrated by ceremoniously breaking 1008 coconuts in each direction. The ceremony commenced at 7 a.m. and was completed by midnight. When it was over, the Balayogi broke his mauna by melodiously chanting the Omkar Shabd. The next day at midnight, the Divine Guru again appeared. As the Balayogi had been observing mauna since 29th October 1953, he had only been able to converse with his Guru in sign language so far. Now that he had broken his mauna, he could converse with him more freely and easily. That apart, up to now, the Balayogi had been completely absorbed in his tapas, to the exclusion of everything else. Therefore, neither had any doubt arisen in his mind about the true identity of his Guru, nor had it ever crossed his mind to question him about it. As we had mentioned earlier, when the Divine Guru appeared before him on that fateful day of 7th August 1949, the Balayogi had taken him to be a Sadguru of the Jangam Devar sect, and he continued to hold on to this belief throughout these first 8 years of his tapas, i.e. up to May 1957, when he attained Dik Siddhi of all the 4 directions. But now a doubt arose in his mind as regards to the real identity of his Guru, and he proceeded to question him about it. Balayogi, who are you? What is your true identity? Divine Guru, don't you know who I am? Balayogi says, no, I don't. I am further perplexed by your behavior and your appearance. You suddenly materialize before me as if out of thin air, and just as suddenly you disappear again. That apart, in your features and to all other respects, you look exactly like Shankar Bhagavan. The only differences that I can see between you and Bhagavan are that Shankar Bhagavan has a snow-white complexion, whereas you are dark, and whereas there is tejas or luminosity emanating from Shankar Bhagavan, there is no such tejas emanating from you. I find this quite mystifying, and hence a doubt has arisen in my mind about your actual identity. Divine Guru, said with an amused smile, "After all that I have done for you, do you still have doubt? All right, I will clear your doubt after you complete the full 12 years of your Yuga tapas." As there were still 4 years left for completion of the Yuga tapas, the Divine Guru directed the Bal Yogi to do tapas for this remaining period, facing the east. He also told the Bal Yogi that from now on he could start initiating aspirants into dhyana, and that he need not continue his present practice of remaining in samadhi for all the 24 hours. Just 12 hours a day would suffice. In accordance with the above directions of his Guru, the Bala Yogi now started adhering to the following daily routine. From 4 a.m. to 4 p.m. he did dhyana, during which period he was mostly in samadhi. From 4 p.m. to midnight he gave darshan to devotees. During this period, kirtan was also organized at the dhyana mandir. From midnight to 1 a.m. he attended to his ablutions and had his daily bath. From 1 to 3 a.m. he would rest. So far, the Bala Yogi had restricted his diet to consuming a measured quantity of milk once every day after his midnight bath. He now started partaking of a milk and fruit diet twice a day. Once at 3 a.m. before sitting for dhyana, and a second time at 4 p.m. when he got up from dhyana. As hitherto, the serpents continued to favor the Bala Yogi with their attention. One night during this period, a snake entered the dhyana mandir while the Bala Yogi was in samadhi, apparently through the water outlet, and bit him on the hand, tearing away a bit of the flesh in the process. The Bala Yogi only became aware of this when he got up from samadhi and found that his hand was bleeding profusely. However, he suffered no ill effects from this bite. From the earliest days of commencement of tapas, people used to come to Adivarapupeta in large numbers for the darshan of the Bala Yogi. And now that he had started giving public darshan, the stream became a flood, and an ever-increasing number of people started thronging the dhyana mandir for the daily darshan and kirtan. The Bala Yogi always derived special satisfaction from feeding people. Consequently, at his behest, mass feeding of the devotees and the poor was organized regularly every day on 24th January, Bala Yogi's birthday, on Mahashivratri, and on 7th August, the date of commencement of the tapas, and on many other occasions in between. Like the darshan and the kirtan, mass feeding had also become a regular feature of the activities surrounding the Bala Yogi from the very earliest days of his tapas. The tapas and spiritual ministration continued side by side for the next 3.5 years, and soon time turned the corner to the year 1961. On 7th August of this year, the Bala Yogi would complete the full 12 years of his Yuga tapas. Siddhi of Yuga tapas. From about January 1961, the Bala Yogi started losing inclination for even the very restricted diet of milk and fruit that he was having. First, the fruits were deleted, and then he reverted back to his original pure milk diet. And gradually, even this was reduced, and soon he had restricted himself to consuming an occasional glass of milk, often only after an interval of many days. On most days, he merely drank some water when he went to the well for his daily midnight bath, and apparently this seemed to suffice. At the same time, the period of samadhi began to increase again. Around the beginning of June 1961, the Bala Yogi became absorbed in continuous nirvikalpa samadhi, which lasted an unbroken for full 2 months, i.e., for the whole of June and July 1961. At midnight of the 1st of August 1961, the Divine Guru came and aroused the Bala Yogi from his deep samadhi. When he saw that the Bala Yogi had returned to normal consciousness, the Divine Guru smiled and said, "You had a doubt about my true identity, didn't you? All right, now watch closely." As he said those words, a dazzling light like lightning flashed forth from the Guru's body, and instead of the dark-hued Jangam Deva, there stood before him the snow-white and bewitching form of his Ishtadev, Shankar Bhagavan. It was thus revealed to the Bala Yogi that his Guru had been none other than Shankar Bhagavan himself, who used to come and guide him in the guise of a Jangam Deva. Having cleared the Bala Yogi's doubt on this point, Shankar Bhagavan and Mother Parvati, who had been accompanying him, sat on the dhyana platform and began to converse affectionately with the Bala Yogi,
whom they looked upon as their disciple and their child. Shankar Bhagavan told the Balayogi that his period of tapas was over and he was now free to roam at will and act as it pleased him. "You may go wherever you like and do whatever you wish to," said the Bhagavan. To this, the Balayogi replied that he had no wish to go anywhere nor do anything in particular. "Do you have a wish in mind?" Shambhu then inquired. "You may ask for anything and it shall be granted to you." Again the Balayogi replied that he desired nothing at all and that he would do whatever Shankar Bhagavan wanted him to do. Well pleased with this answer, Shankar Bhagavan complimented the Balayogi on his steadfastness in tapas and then told him that henceforth his mission would be to rouse the dormant spirituality of the people in general and to help sadhakas, aspirants who are struggling on the spiritual path to gain liberation from the yoke of samsara. To this end, he should travel around and give darshan to people. Such darshan would help in weaning them away from the materialistic to the spiritual path. He should initiate aspirants into the secret and mystic path of Dhyana Yoga and guide them so that they are able to gain liberation in this very life. He should give solace to those who grieved and heal those who suffered from myriad afflictions of the mind and the body. This process of healing would be effected by giving the sufferers sacred vibhuti, which would be blessed and consecrated by him for this purpose. Shankar Bhagavan then told the Balayogi that henceforth he should use the name Shivabalayogi. Bala is another name for Mother Parvati, so the name signified the Lord of Yogis devoted to Shiva and Parvati. Later, the Balayogi on his own changed the name given to him by Shiva to Shivabalayogi Maharaj, as he felt that the use of the title Yogeshwar in the name might be misunderstood by many to imply that he was being equated with Ishvara, the Supreme Lord. Finally, Shankar Bhagavan told his disciple that he would make him sit in tapas from time to time as the need arose in the future. Then, giving their blessings and bidding an affectionate farewell, Shankar and Bhavani disappeared. It is significant that Sri Shivabalayogi Maharaj from that day started exhibiting in his own body the Ardhanarishwara Sarup, i.e., one half of his body showed the characteristics of a man and the other half had many characteristics peculiar to a woman, thus signifying in his own person the union of Parvati and Parameshwar. As the day for completion of the Yuga Tapas of the Balayogi drew near, thousands of people began streaming into Adivara Puketa for the darshan of the yogi. By the morning of 7th August 1961, a vast crowd numbering well over 300,000 had assembled and in and around the Dhyana Mandir, and they waited in joyous expectation for the yogi to emerge. At 8 that morning, the Balayogi, or Sri Shivabalayogi Maharaj as he was now named, marked the completion of the 12-year period of Yuga Tapas by chanting the Omkar Shabd in a melodious voice. The doors of the Dhyana Mandir were then thrown open and he was escorted to a high wooden platform which had been constructed especially for this occasion. As he emerged from the Dhyana Mandir, a mighty roar went up from the assembled multitude. Unused as he was to walking and considerably weakened by the lack of nourishment during the 2-month-long samadhi, Sri Shivabalayogi Maharaj had to be helped onto the darshan dais. Then, as the yogi came into the full view of the vast assembly, thunderous cheering broke out, and the countryside reverberated with ecstatic Jai Jaikars that issued from the 300,000 throats. The adoration of his devotees nearly sent the yogi into samadhi again, and he had to be literally held up to prevent him from falling. Standing there with his eyes closed in a semi-conscious state of spiritual ecstasy, Sri Shivabalayogi Maharaj silently showered his blessings on the people who had assembled for his darshan. As the crowd pushed and jostled to get a closer view of the Mahatma, they saw standing before them a yogi whose body, though emaciated and deformed by the rigors of his intense tapas, nevertheless shone with a strange luster and visibly exuded peace and spiritual grace. The point of digression: the term Ardhanarishwara means half god, half goddess form. This is one of the forms of Shankar, in which one half of his body appears as Shiva and the other half as Parvati. This form signifies the union of Parvati and Parameshwar, i.e., the Supreme Lord and his Shakti. Continuing, the establishment of the Adi Ashram. After the completion of the Yuga Tapas, Sri Shivabalayogi Maharaj felt no immediate inclination to go anywhere, and he continued to reside for the time being at Adivarapupeta. The work of spiritual ministration, which had commenced immediately after the yogi attained Diksiddhi of the four directions in May 1957, now acquired added impetus as people began coming for the yogi's darshan in ever-increasing numbers. A need was soon felt to organize a proper ashram, so the area surrounding the Dhyana Mandir was acquired. A compound wall built, and thus a regular ashram came into being. This is now the Adi Ashram of the Sri 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 Shivabalayogi Maharaj Trust. An ashram committee was also formed, which was made responsible for organizing the daily darshan, kirtan, dhyana diksha and other ashram activities. The propitiating of Raktakali. On 19th January 1962, a family from Rajamundry came for the darshan of Sri Swamiji. They brought along with them their teenage daughter, aged about 18 years, who appeared to be in a trance-like state. The parents explained to Sri Swamiji that their daughter was an ardent devotee of Mother Kali, and that lately she had been keeping upvas, or total abstention from food, as a part of her worship of the mother. A day or so earlier, the girl suddenly went into trance and started asking for blood to quench her thirst. Naturally, the strange behavior of their daughter frightened the parents, and so they brought the girl to Sri Swamiji. While the parents were explaining all this to Sri Swamiji, the girl sat quietly, reclining against the wall at the back. All of a sudden, like one jolted by an electric current, the girl was jerked into an erect posture. Like one possessed, she started grinding her teeth in a violent and frightening manner, and swinging her body from side to side. It was apparent from her behavior that she had lost her normal consciousness and had become totally unaware of her surroundings. As she obviously appeared to be possessed, a devotee sitting nearby asked her who she was. In a thundering voice, she replied, "I will not tell. Who are you?" When the devotee concerned announced his own identity, the girl stated that she was Somalamma, known as Shyamalamba of Rajamundry, that she had now come as Raktakali, that she would first devour herself and then kill the people of Adivarapupeta, including the Swamiji, then she would devastate the whole country. Only thus would her present consuming thirst for blood be satisfied. Sri Shivabalayogi Maharaj, who had been watching and listening quietly all the while, now addressed Raktakali in the person of the girl. He assured her that he would give her all the blood she required to quench her thirst, so she should leave the devotees alone and come to him. He then extended his left arm for Raktakali to slake her thirst. With a vicious smile, Raktakali seized his arm and bit into the extended palm of his hand. Blood spurted out from the palm, and Raktakali began to suck it greedily as though she was tormented by an insatiable thirst. This blood drinking went on for almost 2 hours, and all this while Sri Swamiji quietly continued to converse with her. In reply to one of his questions, Raktakali said that his blood was sweet as nectar, and that she had quenched her thirst for the next 2000 years. Finally, Raktakali appeared satisfied and was pleased. She blessed Sri Swamiji, bestowed all her powers on him, and took her leave. Immediately after this, the girl became her normal self again. Sthapana of Shivalinga. At the behest of the devotees, Sri Swamiji agreed to install a Shivalinga and an icon of Mother Parvati in the Dhyana Mandir to commemorate
according to religious tradition, the place where he had done his tapasya. Soon after this decision was taken, a beautiful Shivalinga appeared before Sri Swamiji in his dhyan. It was simultaneously revealed to him that this was the Shivalinga meant for installation in the Dhyana Mandir, and that it would be found in the Narmada river near the Sangam, or confluence that adjoins the famous Omkareshwar temple. On the basis of this revelation, Sri Swamiji briefed two devotees, Gauri Shankar and Satyanarayan Reddy, on how and where to find the Shivalinga, and dispatched them to the Narmada river with instructions to locate the Shivalinga and bring it back with them. In spite of an intense search, these devotees could not find a Shivalinga conforming to the description given by Sri Swamiji, and so they were compelled to return empty-handed. When these devotees failed to find the Shivalinga, Sri Swamiji summoned Sadhu Narayan Das, an initiated disciple of Tapasviji Maharaj. He gave him an exact description of the Shivalinga, and this time, in order to ensure that Narayan Das would succeed in his mission, Sri Swamiji instructed him to sit in dhyana on the banks of the Narmada opposite the Sangam, near the Omkareshwar temple. Sri Swamiji assured Narayan Das that the location of the Shivalinga would be revealed to him in his dhyana. With high hopes, Sadhu Narayan Das left for the Narmada river as instructed by Sri Swamiji, sat in dhyana at the place he had indicated. Though he continued to sit thus for 20 days running, no revelation came, and he felt thoroughly dejected at the thought of having to go back without accomplishing his task. Rather than return empty-handed, he decided he would select a Shivalinga of his own choice and take it along as he went back. Looking around, he soon found a beautiful Shivalinga with a natural luster emanating from it, and so he picked it up to take back with him as a substitute for the one he failed to find. Though Sadhu Narayan Das was somewhat consoled at having found a good substitute, Shivalinga, the thought that he had failed to find the Shivalinga described by Sri Swamiji continued to weigh on his mind. This made him sad at heart. One night before he was due to leave, Sadhu Narayan Das felt restless and unhappy, so he strolled across to the spot where he had sat in dhyana all those days. The thought of his failure continued to press his mind, and he sat staring out at the river in a disconsolate mood. As he watched the dark waters of the river tumbling and gurgling past, his mind soon became calm and peaceful, and he went into deep dhyan. Suddenly, he had a vision of the Jyoti, or light, and he felt that the Jyoti was emerging from within him and lighting up the whole area around. Startled by this vision, he opened his eyes and saw that a ray of brilliant light was actually emanating from his forehead and was being beamed toward the center of the river. Looking along this beam of light, Sadhu Narayan Das saw to his joy and wonder that the light was playing upon a beautiful Shivalinga that was bobbing up and down the water in the center of the river, reflecting back brilliant hues of silver and gold. With a throbbing heart, Sadhu Narayan Das waded out to the river, and though the Shivalinga was rather heavy, under normal circumstances at least 2 or 3 men were required to lift it. He found no difficulty in picking it up and bringing it out. Next day, with a joyful heart, he left for Adivara Pupeta with both the Shivalingas. The sacred Shivalinga revealed to Sri Swamiji in his dhyana and found by Sadhu Narayan in his mysterious elevating circumstances, was installed by Sri Swamiji in the Dhyana Mandir on Mahashivaratri of 1962, 25th February 1962. He consecrated the lingam by the power of his tapas, thus making it an awakened and living manifestation of the great god Shiva. This Swayambhu Linga, self-manifested Linga, also known as Atma Linga, had a silver sheen on one side and a golden sheen on the other. The silvery coloring is representative of the snow-white complexion of Shiva, and the golden coloring is representative of the golden complexion of Mother Parvati. Thus, the Shivalinga exhibits the Ardhanarishwara Swarup of Shankar Bhagavan. Installation of Parvati Murti. While the search for the Shivalinga was going on, an icon of Mother Parvati, which had been specially commissioned by for the Adivarapoketa ashram, was being sculptured in Mysore. The installation ceremony of this Murti statue was scheduled to take place immediately after the Sapana of the Shivalinga on 25th February 1962, i.e. Mahashivaratri night. On the night of 24th February 1962, i.e. the night previous to the installation, Sri Swamiji was sitting along in the Dhyana Mandir when Bhavani, another name for Parvati, appeared before him and demanded that two blood sacrifices be performed to propitiate her during the installation ceremony. But Sri Swamiji promptly refused. Reverently, though firmly, he informed the mother that a blood sacrifice was not acceptable to him, and hence no blood sacrifice would be performed within the precincts of the ashram. At this, Mother Bhavani simply smiled and vanished. As subsequent events will show, the mother was determined to have her own way in spite of the objections of her recalcitrant son. On the day of the installation ceremony, i.e. Mahashivaratri day of 1962, people began arriving in Adivarapoketa from early morning onwards, and as the day wore on, a vast multitude had congregated at the ashram. At about 4 p.m. in the afternoon, a stout sadhu arrived with his party to witness the installation ceremony. Kirtan, or devotional singing, was going on at the time, and a large number of devotees lost to the outer world in Bhava Samadhi were dancing ecstatically to the beat of the devotional music. The sadhu observed all this for some time and then announced with a sneer to all who would care to listen that these people who were supposedly in Bhava Samadhi were in fact humbugs and were faking this condition to attract attention to themselves. To prove his point more emphatically, the sadhu struck the man nearest to him with one of his wooden sandals. By this somewhat drastic action, the sadhu hoped to deflate the person and thereby expose what he assumed to be mere pretense on his part. Unfortunately for the sadhu, the man he struck happened to be Hanuman in Hanuman Bhava. This man immediately snatched the same wooden sandal from the sadhu's hand and retaliated by striking the sadhu a resounding crack on the head with such tremendous force that the sadhu's head split open and he fell unconscious to the ground. This caused an immediate commotion as people crowded around to see what had happened. The sadhu was somehow extricated from the crowd and carried in that unconscious state to Sri Swamiji. Blood was pouring from the sadhu's head in a copious stream, and as soon as Swamiji saw the sadhu, he recalled Bhavani's demand for blood sacrifice. He was rather upset and remonstrated with the mother, saying, "I told you there should be no blood sacrifice in the ashram, and now look what you have done." Sri Swamiji then liberally applied consecrated vibhuti to the wound, tightly bound up the sadhu's head. This saved the sadhu's life, and after some time he regained consciousness. Later that night, as Sri Swamiji sat alone in the Dhyana Mandir, Bhavani appeared again before him and told him that she was thirsty and that she wanted blood to quench her thirst. Haven't you had enough?" asked Sri Swamiji. "See how much blood that poor man lost." "No," said Bhavani, "only half my thirst has been quenched. I want more blood." "In that case," said Sri Swamiji, "I will give all the blood you want. Please leave the devotee alone." He then extended his left hand. Bhavani bit into the left forearm and with great relish started sucking the blood that began to flow out. Immediately as it approached midnight, Sri Swamiji requested Bhavani to let him go, as the time for the installation ceremonies was approaching. Thereupon, Bhavani smiled, and blessing her yogi son, she disappeared. The unique and mysterious circumstances attendant on the installation of the Shivalinga and the Murti of Mother Parvati, which have been related above, are a clear proof that Shankara Bhagavan and Bhavani are manifest in the Dhyana Mandir as living presences. Therefore, to obtain darshan of the Dhyana Mandir and the deities installed therein is in itself a great blessing.